Morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. We have a lot to get through today on the agenda, and as previously notified, we will take a break for lunch as the meeting is expected to go on into the afternoon. First, I'm aware that we have two substitutes at today's meeting. Mr. Merry is substituting for Mr. Pendleton, who sent his apologies, and Mr. Gatoya is substituting for Mr. Poland, who sent his apologies. Which moves us on to item 1. The first item is the minutes of the meeting held on September the 7th, 2022. I move that these are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed? Yes. Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda is the question time. I've received one question from Mr. Shepherd. Copies of this and the reply have been circulated to all members, have been published online, so these can be taken as read. Mr. Shepherd has advised that he does not have a supplementary question and is not in attendance today. That therefore concludes the item, but I thank Mr. Shepherd for his question. Item 3 is questions asked by members under Standing Order 7. I've not received any such questions. Item 4, yes.
Excuse me, Chair. I don't think any of us have actually seen a copy of the question. It's not published on mod.gov.
No, it was circulated on the email.
It was published this morning. It's circulated on email yesterday.
Okay, it's just I'm looking at mod.gov at the moment and it's not on there.
It's on the website. I'm looking at it now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Item 4, I have no urgent items. Item 5, next we have declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest they wish to declare? Mr. Richardson.
I'd just like to declare an interest in agenda item 8 as a board member of the LEP.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Mr. Morgan.
Likewise, the same reason.
Thank you. Any other interest to declare? No. Okay. Which moves us on to item 6, which is declarations of the party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? No. Item 7, I've not received any petitions. Therefore, we move on to item 8, which is the first substantive item of today's agenda, Leicester and Leicestershire's Enterprise Partnership Annual Update. The report starts on page 15 of your agenda pack. Sarah Rudkin, Economic Growth Team Leader here at the County Council, will introduce the item. We're also joined by Tom Purnell and Simon Lawrence. I will also welcome Ms. Sue Tilley, the head of the LEP, and Mr. Andy Reid, the chair of the LEP board, to the meeting, who are present for this item. Mr. Bedford has had to send his apologies, is unable to attend today due to unforeseen circumstances. Thank you and welcome to everyone to the meeting today. Sarah, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Sarah Rudkin, Economic Growth Team Leader that sits within the Growth Service. I'd like to introduce Sue Tilley, Head of LEP. She's been Head of LEP since the beginning of 2022, following Mandip Rai leaving the organisation. And Andy Reid, Co-Chair of the LEP. Andy is co-chair with Anil Majathia, following Kevin Harris stepping down. You've all received the paper, which outlines the work of the LEP over the past 12 months. The LEP have continued to move forward with key objectives set out in their economic growth strategy, with their delivery plan, with capital projects delivered via the Growing Places Fund, business support with the Growth Hub, and the skills agenda. The delivery plan is very much focused on partnership, and the economic growth team works with the LEP in delivering that plan. So I'd like to pass over to Sue and Andy now, who are going to provide you with a short presentation and then allow time for questions and discussion.
Great, thanks very much, Sarah, for that, and thank you very much for being here.
feels very familiar. Some of the furniture has changed over the last few years since I left County Hall in the same team as a number of years ago. But it's great to be back at Scrutiny and be able to sort of update you all on our plan. I'm going to ask Sue to do a little bit of the detail. We did have a video, but and some of you did attend the AGM, but it's 8 minutes of me talking, so I will probably skip that particular slide, which runs over the plan, but it is available if members have got nothing better to do sort of later and wish to watch a video which highlights all of the things that we've got on the slides that we're put in front of you today. I'm just going to do a very brief overview, I suppose, of where the LEP sits at the moment and the delivery plan and the strategy that we currently have, and then perhaps probably try and leave much more time for questions and answers. We probably won't even use our 10 minutes that we've been allocated to speak at the beginning. So basically, as members are aware, the LEP is a partnership, as Sarah has just sort of said. So it requires the ecosystem of the economic development and regeneration system in the county. So it includes ourselves, the districts and the county, as well as many business voices. So the Chamber of Commerce, the IOD, the CBI and Leicester Business Voice and others like the Federation of Small Business. So as a whole, it's a complex ecosystem that we're trying to sort of maintain together. And the strategy that we're working to was one that took a couple of years for us to develop for the period 21 to 2030, and included all of the partners that are sitting around this table. So many of your members who are here are also sit on our board and will know the amount of time we took to try and create a strategy that grows the economy here in Leicestershire, but does it in a way in which it's a partnership approach. So you'll see, hopefully, in a second, and you do have it in your papers, but large part of the strategy is around the 4 pillars that we have, and it will be on a slide in a second. So the 4 pillars are those that we feel are those that will actually grow our economy and also tackle some of the other bigger issues that we need to do. So they're around inclusion. So we need an inclusive growth in the economy, because as most people will know, just growing the GDP figures doesn't necessarily mean that there's an uplift for everybody in and around the county, in the city and the county, whether that's in the city or in the rural areas, is that levels of poverty and wages still remain below the national average. So whilst unemployment levels will be low, part of the problem is that actually the standard of living isn't increased in line with that unless we actually ensure that that growth is inclusive. So inclusive growth, it's around innovation. We recognise that, I was just saying to Sarah and others before, one of our strengths as an economy is that we have 42,000 micro businesses, and when we're talking micro, we're talking 89% of those are businesses with under 10 employees. So the vast majority of our economy, 80–90% of it, is really micro businesses. And so that's a strength, but it's also a bit of a weakness that we always have to sort of work with. There aren't major employers that you can turn on the tap and grow the economy. It requires a really detailed approach to that. So innovation is something we want to drive down from just being seen as something that is making an invention at the university, build a little startup, grow it. That's job done. 42,000 businesses out there that need to embed innovation as part of their growth. 42,000 businesses all added one person. You can imagine the amount of economic impact that would have. So it's driving the innovation. It's around our productivity. As everybody knows, the UK and ourselves, our figures are that the productivity rates are still below where we would like to see them. And so we believe by bringing all these things together through inclusive growth, some stuff around innovation, targeting productivity, and then finally, quite probably very relevant at this stage with those out at COP, sustainability. So we see sustainability, and we mirror much of the work that you're doing as a county council on net zero, just to ensure that right at the heart of everything that we do, so every project that comes forward, every funding bid, sustainability and our target of hitting net zero in the same way as you are, is at the heart of that. But also, as you all know, from an economic development point of view, sustainability is also an economic driver. It's an opportunity for us really to sort of grow the economy on a green economy and a green agenda. So there are 4 drivers. There are so many other aspects to this, as you can imagine. So we do have a growth hub, which Sue will talk about, and some of the delivery plan. But at the heart of this, it is ensuring that our GDP, GVA and our citizens benefit from the economic regeneration plans of all the partners that work together in the ecosystem in and across the county. So hopefully that helps set the scene. Just very briefly at the top lines, because I'm sure you can probably ask some further questions about this. At the moment, we're still awaiting a letter from the government about the future of the LEP and other organisations across the country and the level of funding we'll receive for next year. But I assume, like many other organisations, are all waiting for the 17th of November and what sort of follows on from that. So I've had indications from the regional office that we should hear something of some nature in the period straight after the 17th or in the days and weeks after that. So I can't answer many questions specifically on exactly what that will look like, but like many of us, we wait we wait that date. Sue.
Thank you, Andy, and good morning, everybody. I'm Sue Tilley. I've been leading at the LEP for nearly 12 months now, but have been with the LEP much longer. So as Andy's outlined, we're working very much to our 4 pillars, and I thought today it'd be good to take you through the delivery plan that the LEP have been working to. So if first of all we looked at the productivity pillar, and there was a number of objectives that we had to meet through that. So again, it was about delivering to the a good framework for business startup and through the Business Gateway Growth Hub, which is principally funded through ERDF funding and delivered in conjunction with partners at the Chamber of Commerce, City Council and County Council. We have been somewhat hampered, so we're still at amber on this, and we've still got some time to go this year because we didn't have a Growth Hub manager. I'm delighted to say we've now recruited a Growth Hub manager who started last week, and she's going to be very busy. So that's, you know, it's a good positive because we are going through uncertain times as a LEP. So to be able to recruit somebody within that period has been really great move forward. So the role of the Growth Hub is very much to provide business support and advice for businesses, and we've managed to maintain that service even though we're going through this transitional period. So that's a green, you know, we're quite confident that things are really moving forward well there. And support for productivity, as Andy outlined, productivity is a key activity for us, and we can't do it in isolation. So we're very much working in collaboration and looking at ways where we can, how we can bring additional funding into the LEP. So we've successfully worked with across the East Midlands with Derby, Nottingham and Lincolnshire to secure a collaborative bid for Made Smarter, and then working with Derbyshire and Lincolnshire again. We've just heard that we've been successful in obtaining funding for a Create Growth programme, which will support our creatives, and then delivery of the tourism services that Sarah spoke about earlier. It's very much an important area of work that we're working on, and we've provided funding through our Growing Places Fund to that. So we see that as a real positive. So that's the productivity pillar. It's all about driving productivity for our businesses and helping them to become more productive. We go to the innovation pillar again. Andy has spoken about this, but this year we've been very active through our through our innovation board. I think the important thing with the innovation pillar is it's very much linked to making businesses more productive, and by being innovative in their business, it can actually help with their bottom line. So we're working very closely. We've put together an innovation delivery plan, and we're planning for the Leicester Innovation Festival in February this coming year. And you'll see quite a lot of coverage about that. So again, it's all about raising awareness and making businesses think that to become more productive, more competitive, they need to innovate. So that's the innovation pillar. And then if we move on to inclusivity, again, really important area of work, working with schools and colleges in our area through the Careers Hub. So we've really got some, you know, positive ways forward with this. You'll see we've got with our traffic light system, lots of green. We're working well with the schools and the colleges. We have a We Discover project as well that's progressing very well. The only area where we've got some more work to do is with the NEAT prevention work. because the project is now moving forward, but it was quite a challenge to get some of the neat numbers. People kept going and finding jobs, so it was very difficult to actually meet our outputs, but we're pulling ahead with that one. And then digital poverty, again, we've got some really good work that's being done there. And also the work we're doing with the sports park. So the team have been extremely busy within the skills team. They've been very, very active. And then sustainability, which I suppose is shorthand for low carbon. Again, we've been investing through the business rates pooling to fund projects including a Loughborough Town Centre regeneration and green growth corridors. Again, that's a green. We've been making good progress there. Investments have been made in several local regeneration projects. You will have read in the papers that we submitted that Granby Street and George Street regeneration gateway, that's now been fully completed. So that's a positive. And the Loughborough Town Centre is 95% completed. So good green activities there. We're also working with Midlands Connect, and we are looking at ways to decarbonise East Midlands Airport. So we've actually procured that. It's still at procurement stage, but we're hoping that it will progress very soon. So you can see, without me going through all the lines, that we've made a lot of progress, and we should be on target by the end of the year. So I hope that gives you some view as to how things are. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. We haven't run through all the details. There's lots of details in the enterprise zones, the different projects, etc., in the written report that Sue's put together. So I thought that would be better for you to be able to extract probably some questions from that. So hopefully that just gives you a brief overview, and happy to take questions from members.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, Andy and Sue for your informative presentation. Over to members now. Anyone have any questions for today? Oh, Amanda.
Thank you. Everyone's been really quiet this morning. I did have a couple of questions, but would you mind going back to the slide with the four thingamajigs on the top, the pillars? Yeah.
4 pillars.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's the one. Thank you. On the sustainability pillar, you've got sustainable transport and connectivity. And I noted in the report just how much money the LEP invests in physical roads, trains, in terms of the transport networks. So my sort of question really, I mean, a long question, I don't know if it's like, is I find it really difficult when I look at my communities and the businesses that are already located, and then we have the real challenge that we're cutting bus services. The revenue funding isn't there to actually look at real sustainable options. So we place businesses, and I'll talk about business, the Meridian Business Park near where I am. And just yesterday, I've got a cut to bus services going to the Meridian Business Park. What kind of challenges do you have in terms of economic development, bringing in with investments, when actually what we've got is lots of offices and lots of roads to get there? But for those individuals that don't have a car, we don't want people to go into the car. We want them to use public transport, but the services get cut and cut and cut. And I just really want to see, how are you, dealing with that challenge? And then the second question is just the economic challenge about people spending more time at home, working at home, and whether or not the economic development offer has been adjusted yet to recognise just how many people are now working in a hybrid model as opposed to always going into the office. Thank you.
Wow. Two really, really good questions. I suppose in a sense, the sustainable transport system is where we have to just work in partnership. We're not a planning authority, and actually some of the investments you have seen probably pretty historic now, because the funding probably won't be coming through the LEP any longer. So I suppose it is a bit of a look back, and for us to work with partners like Tom and Sarah here, and also in the city, to see where we will have done some really good stuff. And so at our heart, as I say at the moment in this new strategy, is to make sure that sustainable question is at the heart at the beginning of every process. So we will be funding through the growth fund money that we've got a couple of things, and there's some of my investment panel are sitting here, and I can probably assure us in those meetings we've made sure that new developments, that all of that is at the forefront, whereas perhaps, as you say, historically things have been planned where there were existing bus services and have then been lost. So there is a disconnect between those, and that's for us all in partnership to try and find a solution to that. So probably the other example, the other way around, would be, this is a very personal perspective and probably links to Councillor Morgan's area, but when with the growth of the logistics at East Midlands Airport, clearly out in the sticks, away from the centres of population, but a lot of work has gone in to ensure that there are ways of connecting those who are unemployed in the city of Loughborough or Colville, etc., who can then get there. So if you see the service, it may not be perfect. I'd be really interested to get some feedback from members and others on whether that's working, but clearly the drive is then to ensure that we have a variety of ways, and particularly because those sort of places are 24/7. So actually a 9 till 5 bus service is no good for a lot of the places. As the world of work, which links to your second question, the world of work has changed. So actually 60% of people, even before the pandemic, now work an atypical working week. So actually we designed so many of our things around people working 9 till 5, but actually the majority of the workforce has stopped working 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. So actually our services sometimes do lag a little bit behind that. So it is a major driver, and perhaps fortunately you've got our investment people coming later. Mike might be able to explain a little bit more detail. I don't know whether other officers are able to, but clearly transport links and the environment in which people are relocating are absolutely vital, and if we don't get that right, then it just makes it very, very, very difficult to do that. On the second piece on working from home, and well, I suppose the sort of the sense of hybrid working, we're still playing catch up. I suppose there was a little bit of a sense during the pandemic. I hate to use the phrase because it got a little bit overused, but this sort of build back better, that we would learn from it. I have found in a lot of environments, a lot of people then tried rushing back to what was regarded as normal at the time, and others are still finding their feet. So in a way, we've got a hybrid at the moment that we're trying to work out what that sort of looks like, working with the team here at County, the city, and our economic intelligence that we're gathering. I don't have an answer, if I'm being really honest, on exactly what that looks like. Even just managed to find a car park space here today is a prime example, isn't it? I think even when I left 25 years ago, you couldn't find a car park space at County Hall, and you can now. So, I mean, so clearly people here are working in a different way, and that's probably really welcome. If it's as effective, which many of us have found that working from home is, then we have to readjust some of our economic models, not necessarily to be transporting people around unnecessarily to different places. So it will put a massive impact on us, but hopefully it hits sustainable. But the reason there are 4 pillars is it then makes us think, and Sue did highlight this, and I'll finish on this one, but say, for example, with that need group, digital poverty, we recognise as one of the major drivers of people being inactive. So as you know, unemployment is low, but when you look at the levels of inactivity, there's 250, 300,000 people like me who hit 55, 56, hit the pandemic and decided, actually, I don't want to go back to work. So there's 300,000 people being taken at that end. And then at the other end, there are still probably 500,000 young people who are not seeking work in the way that would turn up on the measures. And we've discovered working in that need group, and particularly with around digital skills and digital poverty, many of us have taken it for granted that we have Wi-Fi access. If you're living in a tower block in the city of Leicester with a Warm Mobile as your data plan, the pandemic was a really lonely time, and many of those don't have the digital skills to engage. It's at the other end as well. As public services go online, I think we'll all probably recognise this. I am now a full-time IT consultant to my elderly parents and family, trying to access levels of service that they can't really access because they just don't use computers or laptops or iPads. My mum's brilliant, but other members of the family finding it very, very difficult to access services. So you've got digital poverty and digital exclusion at both ends. So that's probably where the challenge will come, is really making sure that the system that seems to work for us can work for everybody. Hopefully that brief. I don't know whether any of Tom or Terry just wanted to, how we work together on some of those bigger questions around planning.
Yeah, I mean, just on the public transport issue, bus services issue, clearly that's, always been a problem in terms of how we can fund the services that are required to support economic growth. And of course, that's become even more of a challenge now, given the financial challenges that the council faces. But also, I guess that with more people working from home in a hybrid model, that does reduce demand for bus services as well, and puts further pressure on the viability of those services. So I think it is a matter of working together in partnership to make best use of the funding that we do have available to put in place the best services we can to support the economy. But it's going to be difficult, I think it's fair to say.
Thank you. Mrs. Page.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. My question is more or less, how do you ensure a fair geographical spread and a balance between, for instance, inner city need and rural need? Because coming from a rural area, there is an awful lot of a large economy built around tourism, bed and breakfast, riding establishment, and a lot of those small businesses feel very much disadvantaged. So.
Thank you. Hopefully, realised I did try to include rural into the presentation, because I'm very aware of that, having represented rural areas over the period, and recognising, I think probably in those things I was saying around the micro businesses, recognising that they're not just in the city, they are in the towns and across the rural areas. So actually, as I say, it's a strength and a weakness, is they're so probably spread that it's very difficult to work with them. But our growth hub has been successfully working with about 6,500 of those 42,000 businesses over the last period. So the reach is good, and that's working with the district councils and the business advisors we've got. But I wouldn't say it was perfect. Because there is going back to what Tom has just been saying about future funding, there's a little bit of a cloud hanging over the way we fund those business services sort of moving forward. But also from an economic development point of view, I'll be really honest, we really try to make sure in that grid that we keep the 4 pillars. We're very wary of the size of the county and the districts, and making sure, we had a question at the AGM about North West Leicestershire, quite rightly, making sure that we cover that geographical area. I suppose the only other thing I would say is that we also then work to growing the economy through clusters of existing businesses. There's a lot of evidence that obviously supporting existing clusters of businesses are working together, using innovation through the universities, of which we're lucky to have 3, does mean sometimes, say for example, like the enterprise zones are based in either urban or semi-urban areas, because that's where the real drive for growth will come from. It doesn't mean just because we're investing in Lucep or the life sciences at Charnwood or in the city or at Myra down Hinkley and Bosworth, that means that's ignoring the rural areas. It's just that in sometimes the big glossy big projects that get a lot of attention and lots of the press releases because we're opening new stuff is those areas. I'm being very keen and try to make sure, a bit like this 1.2 million we just got from DCMS, it's 1.2 million that go into the county, and it's for any business, doesn't have to be anywhere specifically. And most of those micro businesses, because that's what it is to help micro creative businesses to grow, they will be in those farmyard office developments that have sprung up around the county. There will be people working from home. So in a way, we're trying to so you won't see big openings and ribbon cutting, but there is a lot of support for micro businesses in different parts. And we see our role at the LEP, increasingly as we have less money ourselves, is convening those partnerships to bring that sort of money in. So hopefully the next bid we get will be successful, but we're working in partnership. We can ensure that we get all those monies and into the plethora of different things that we would like to see and support. So rural areas, definitely there. I always do make sure everybody looks at the grid of things that you need to cover off. And I know particularly coming to County Hall, it would be a rural question. So you're entirely right to keep pushing it. It's entirely right. And Nick and Peter, who's on the board as your representative, yes, is always very keen to ensure that there is a rural agenda that's top of our priorities as well.
That's a very welcome reply. Thank you very much for that. And if I may come back, you mentioned your parents, and I come from an area, my division, where most of, or a very large part of the population is over 80. Everything, even in the next report, we advertised it online on Facebook. Those people do not have Facebook. Some of my areas don't even have active broadband, or there's no reception. And I can't see even your parents or my parents going online and let's see what's happening. So we're going to look at the marketplace agenda or on the LEP website. This is not going to happen. So how do you see, how can LEP be active to get all of the information out there and be more active to reach more people?
It's a really good point. I'm very aware, as you say, of who does and doesn't go onto websites. I mean, even I'm not quite sure any of you would accidentally just trip across the LEP website unless we were here today. You know, I'm being really honest. It's a particular niche market, so we spend lots of our time and effort trying to reach different groups, and that's not just the elderly. So it may be some of those minority ethnic communities in the city. It might be young people who are. So actually, we have established a youth board. I know you've got your own ways of linking in. Although we've renamed it because it's a young person's board, because some of them aren't as young as you would suggest. They're young early entrepreneurs, but there are different ways. So you have to segment the audience that you're talking to, don't you? So most of our audience is businesses. We're talking business to business a lot of the time, not necessarily to individual consumers. It's not B2C. So actually email and social media and other pieces is really powerful for us. But we have been fortunate to secure the work of George Oliver in our comms at the moment, who has obviously, as former editor of the Leicester Mercury, recognises the good old-fashioned newspaper, which my parents do read every day. Many of us have moved on from reading local newspapers, but again, that demographic does read that. So we push really hard to ensure that a lot of our coverage, and there is a telephone number, not just necessarily an email or social media to sort of follow, but try really hard to do that coverage. But as I say, our main priority is B2B rather than to B2C. So you won't see everything that we do, and our target is still how do we talk to 42,000 businesses, and it's between us all, we all struggle to perhaps to talk to some of those really micro businesses. That's like mine. You know, I'm here today, so my business isn't operating. There are tens of thousands of people like me running very, very small 1 to 2 person businesses who, if they're not working, coming to LEP events or Chamber of Commerce events, they're not earning money. Sorry, it's not a plea, but I mean, it's a but it's a reality, and that's what they're the group who need most help, but actually sometimes the hardest to engage with.
Do we have any more questions for members, Mr. Richardson?
We'll ask Andy a question. It was only really, I don't know if you've had any evidence from across the breadth of the LEPs across the country. Coming back to the point you mentioned about productivity and new ways of working. So, yeah, the latest stats I saw says that following the pandemic and the return to work, all but 5% of people in France and Germany have gone back to work. 23% of the British population are still working from home. France and Germany have considerably higher productivity than us. So are we seeing any evidence that the new way of working in the UK is increasing productivity? And is there a role for LEPs across the country to play in advising companies on the best way for their staff to work that might increase that productivity? Because it would seem to me that, you know, we're an outlier in productivity across Europe, but we've got the highest number of people working from home, which would almost suggest that perhaps we're not as productive in new methods of working as others. It just could be anecdotal.
That's really interesting, Terry. As you know, I'm a bit of a policy nerd, so I wouldn't probably try to answer that without any of the evidence, because we were below Germany and France and productivity levels before the pandemic, and much of that is to do with the usual things that we know about productivity. It needs long-term investment, it needs infrastructure, it needs skills, etc. So it's our four. If you've got all our 4 pillars right, I mean that's why they're interlinked. Then you might lead to that productivity. I do have a call later today, and we do meet with the LEPs and others. So actually, I will pose that to the national team to see if they're doing any work on that. I've seen some anecdotal stuff that individually people working from home isn't less productive by company, but I haven't seen any national stats. So, you know, as I say, as a bit of a policy note, I wouldn't want to offer an answer that's anecdotal rather than evidence-based. But you've asked an interesting question. I'll definitely take that one away. Yeah.
Chair, can I suggest that possibly Mr. Reid looks at possibly manufacturing versus office-based work? Because I suspect that probably France and Germany have a much higher percentage of employment within factories and manufacturing than the UK does, which tends to specialise in banking and finance and service sector, and therefore I suspect that might be the difference. But purely speculative, it would be interesting to see what you come up with.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'll take that one away.
Does any other member have any questions? No. Okay. Well, thank you very much to Andy and Sue for presenting today and for answering questions from members, and to Sarah and Tom for their help as well, and to all members who asked questions on the item. So now we move. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 9 is the Place Marketing Leicester and Leicestershire report, which is on pages 29 to 70 of your paperwork. Sarah Rudkin will again introduce the item, and we have Mike Denby, the new Director of Inward Investment and Place Marketing for Leicester and Leicestershire, here to present the report. Welcome, Mr. Denby. Sarah, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to introduce Mike Denby, Director for Inward Investment and Place Marketing. He's been in post since June. He's going to provide an update on the activity around the place marketing team. This is a collaboration between the city and the county and has been in place since 2017. And the activity, the link across is to the economic growth team here at the County Council. The team have continued to move forward with this agenda following another challenging year, but are delivering key projects and representing Leicestershire at key events. Mike, can I pass to you?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So the aim of this report is just to recap on the place marketing team, our activities, who they are, what they do, and the role they play in attracting visitors and businesses to Leicester and Leicestershire. About myself, I've joined Leicester City Council about 4 months ago. I used to work in economic growth and leading the service up in Wakefield, and I'm delighted to be joining you this morning. In terms of the place marketing team, it was established in 2017 with the aim of deliver place marketing activity across Leicester and Leicestershire. The overarching aim of the service is to ensure that we promote the county as the place to visit, live and invest. And the collaboration between the city and county is that the county second a couple of members of staff into the service, and then they will also contribute towards spend, which is usually related to marketing spend. Whilst the figure is up to £60,000 for the last couple of years, it's been around the £50,000 mark in terms of that contribution towards spend. Focusing on inward investment, the aim of the service is to drive a dynamic economy. We want to promote ourselves as an area that's open for business, that's easy for developers and investors to recognise the investment and provide that clear process to support that investment to land in the county. It's not about investment at all costs. It's about trying to attract good quality businesses that align with the city region. The LEP's 4 pillars. And again, it's about trying to make sure that we are working with our key assets, such as the universities and the colleges, so that we can ensure that we're retaining that talent within the county. In terms of what that support looks like, it's about spotting opportunities on how we can work with key partners, making sure that our residents get the first dibs on any jobs that are available from that investment, and making sure that investment trickles down to residents, our local residents. We tend to focus in between the local authority area in terms of our interventions and bridge the gap between the developer or the investor and the local authority area. So we do get involved in conversations with planners to ensure that we do all we can to unblock any potential challenges. But ultimately, it's about that account management, doing all we can to facilitate that investment. It's worth noting that when an investor chooses to invest in an area, almost 90 to 95% of their decision is already made before they've even visited the site, based on what the data is telling them, where the customers are, based on where the skills levels are in that particular area. So what our job is to do is to try and increase those percentage chances to get that yes for investment. In terms of the impact, and the report highlights the businesses that we've supported over the last 12 months. The report's identified nine companies of significance. Again, those businesses do meet the LEP's 4 growth pillars. Just as a quick breakdown, 5 of those in the advanced logistics, 2 advanced manufacturing, 1 high-end digital company, and then 1 retail and sales business. That's a total of 1,500 jobs that's been created during that reporting period. Whilst the numbers look quite impressive, I think it's fair to say we do need to work, and the one thing that I've identified since joining a few months ago is that we need to look at better impact reporting on documents such as this and wider in terms of what that investment means from a business rates perspective. That's something that we could track quite easily, and also what is the level of investment in terms of plant, building, machinery, and what does that mean in terms of that financial investment to the area, and also from a resident perspective, how that works its way down to our local residents. We do work with certain groups in localities such as Hinckley and Bosworth. They've got their own skills group, but what does that mean in terms of ensuring that those individuals that are furthest from the job market are accessing those employment opportunities? Additional activity from the service over the last 12 months includes events and attendance at MIPIM and UK Reef. Early this year, delegates attended from city and county for MIPIM and UK Reef, and the aim of that is to try and attract new investors and developers to the area. But it's about building those connections so that if we've got sites that are either in our ownership, so for example, one site is Lutterworth, and that particular site, and I know the objective for last MIPIM was to ensure that we are building up those relationships so that when that site is available and goes to market, you've got plenty of good quality developers that will be bidding for that opportunity. In terms of the future of inward investment, we know that activity is happening and it is valued, but a lot of the relations tend to be at an officer level. So moving forward, the aim is to try and build up more senior relationships across the local authority areas. The aim of that is to ensure that we can give them that Leicestershire welcome and making sure that, again, we can unblock any challenges that might exist. It's fair to say as well, over the learning over the last 4 months, it does appear to be a complex setup, investing in Leicestershire from contacts that I've worked with that have got interest not only in my previous role in Wakefield but got interest in Leicestershire, and our job is to try and hide that wiring amongst the different local authority areas to show that it is quite straightforward to invest in our area, and you can get to to meet the relevant people, whether it be on a planning issue or whether it be you need to speak to the chief executives. Our job is to try and hide that wiring to facilitate that investment. From a tourism perspective, the Tourism Advisory Board was established in 2020 and they launched a 5-year tourism plan. I do have some copies available if you wanted to view those later. And how that basically works is a strategic board which we encourage venues, it's public and private sector collaboration, and we work together to devise how we can attract more marketing, more visitors, more bed nights to the city and to the county, and I'll talk about some of the ways we do that in terms of the projects. It's fair to say as well, it's the most popular page, particularly visited by visitors on our websites. We get around 1 million views per year on that. It has been a tough last 12 months for the sector. Visitor numbers have been down across the patch by 20%, spend down by 17%, and in pound terms, it's around £200 million to that particular part of the economy. And the sector has shrunk in terms of headcount by about 23%. However, we are seeing a number of green shoots, and the economic impact was 8% stronger than the national average, and we're plus about 10% on visitor numbers compared to the national average as well. We have a number of key projects that will be coming up over the next 12 months for the tourism sector. Last year, DCMS underwent a review of DMOs, destination management organisations, and the aim of that is to sort of clean up the landscape to ensure we've got less providers in that space and more quality providers in that space, so that we can end up with the best performing bodies after that. The DCMS has put out a call for a pilot. We've put ourselves forward for that pilot. It needs to be a large geography, and we're putting a consortia led by Peak District and Derbyshire. So it'd be us, Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire that's part of that consortia. We've made our way to the final 2. And what that will mean is we're expecting the announcement in the autumn statement. Should have been the end of this month, but it's been, sorry, the end of October, but it's been extended. If that goes through, that will mean that we'll get funding directly from DCMS, which would be something that would be a first of recent time. The report also highlights a number of key projects over the last and campaigns over the last 12 months. Campaigns such as Vacation, which is about trying to raise awareness of the activities that are available across the whole of the county. Interestingly, when you look at the amount of engagement from businesses across the patch, we had only 6 businesses from the city, 28 in total from the county, which just shows that we are ensuring that we are, you know, we're not just city-centric, and we are balanced when it comes to these campaigns. And the aim is to obviously encourage people to explore what's on their doorstep and get fitter. And Uncover the Store. Uncover the Store has been a very popular campaign which tells stories about the city and county. 50 stories, video stories have been produced in total, and that's received just nearly 2,000 views of the promotional videos and resulted in a number of 1,800 sign-ups to our e-shop, which is obviously potential customer opportunities and visits for the future. Whilst this is great in terms of the impact that we're making, moving forward, what we're wanting to do is better track the engagement and what that brings to the county in terms of pounds, in terms of that wider impact on the economy. At the moment, we don't have bookable products available, and we're going to be running bookable products through the website. What that will allow us to do is to almost gain data on every pound that we spend and what that generates to the pound in terms of actual bookings. We'll be able to know what the sweet spot is and where our customers are coming from, being able to track their postcodes and capture contact information again, so we can market to those customers for the future and calculate what their average spends are. Like I say, we're getting 1 million visitors to our website, and if we can convert 3% of these, that would convert into 30,000 bookings. Now, that is quite a conservative estimate. On a e-retailing site, it's anything between 2.5% and 7%. But the impact, even if we're just working on an average transactional value of £30, that could be shy of £1 million of bookings that are generated directly through the website. And obviously that's just a brief summary of some of the key points, but I welcome any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mike, for your presentation. So over to members for their questions. Mr. Barclay.
Thanks very much for the presentation. Very clear. You intimated that sort of 80 to 90% of people who do inward investment in Leicestershire have made the decision based on data and everything else. So what can you do to influence more people coming in? If they will, based on the skills available in Leicester City and Leicestershire, it almost seems as though they're just moving away. They would do it anyhow.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So yeah, in terms of the inquiries that we do receive, they are the vast majority are data driven. When it comes to attracting more new to area businesses, this is where the key account relationship is key. So for example, if we've got a cluster of businesses in manufacturing, then that's when we can start to be able to look at their supply chain links and try and attract those businesses to that particular cluster. In addition to that, again, working through their supply chain to understand where the opportunities are there. Again, developers is one way where we really need to attract, and we are focusing our attention on building those relationships up with developers so that they see the opportunities that exist, and they will themselves have their own black book of contacts that they work with in other areas that might see opportunities that exist within those companies.
Thanks very much. I mean, you're obviously doing a tremendous amount of work, and I think it'll be interesting to get the data of how much return you get on pound invested through your organisation and see what the return is. I think it will be good news. I think it will.
Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Mine really follows on from the point that Tom's raised for us to explore it a bit further. So if I look at paragraph 10, inward investment inquiries and successes, and take the first one down there because it's the first one, and it follows on from the comments you made in your presentation, JD Worldwide, is what did we do to attract them here? Where else were they looking? Of the 90 jobs that were created, and you mentioned we're predominantly looking for people, how many of those 90 people live in Leicestershire? How many of those people contribute to the economy in Leicestershire? Because you were talking about the fact that we would want the majority of those people to live in and contribute to the Leicestershire economy. Because I get no sense or flavour from this about those factors, which I know you've covered by saying we need to have more granular information going forward. But it would just be to give me a flavour on how that's working and why it's working. And then on the final bit of, I know from my working career that the biggest drivers of inward investment into this country are predominantly the large financial institutions. So what interaction do you have with those large financial institutions, their inward investment areas? Yeah, I mean, I look at something like Rocker here, and I was instrumental in Rocker setting up in the country in a previous life. So it'd just be interesting to know what your view is on that.
Thank you. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I agree. When I look at this, I want myself to get into the detail. A lot of this investment has landed the last 12 months, and I've not yet been involved in this because it's already landed. But moving forward, I do want better metrics as to give you a sense as to where those residents are coming from. Some areas, like I say, Hinkley and Bosworth, they've got their own skills group that are established, and we can quite easily get that information. But it's not across all areas. We need to pull together some metrics, and we'll get this agreed across all local authority areas so that we can measure this performance and how we link into job centres. So, for example, we might not be delivering the activity ourselves. Job centre would, but part of the referral of that lead would be, we need you to supply us with the postcodes of those that have landed those successful jobs, so we can give more narrative. We don't want to turn this into a beast where we need a team of people that's managing this data, but what we do need to be able to do is drill down a little bit deeper to ensure that this is getting, this investment is getting to those that need it the most. In regards to your question about financial institutions, I can only go on a lot of activity that we're doing moving forward, and those organisations we're doing some active engagement with. We're looking at different companies that are active in different areas. So, for example, Legal and General, they've done a lot in Leeds, they've done a lot in Birmingham. They've done a lot with a constructor who tends to build to rent. So we've got a meeting with their top guy in a couple of weeks' time to discuss where their opportunities are in Leicester, where potential opportunities are in Leicester and Leicestershire. And it is Leicester and Leicestershire is on their target of areas in the UK, because they've not done anything, and that came from a lead from Baroness Morgan initially, and we've worked that through all the way to the very top. She introduced us to their comms guy, and then we've worked us way up from there. So we're trying to get more involvement with the financial institutions moving forward, and again work with those guys so that we can introduce them to key sites that we've got coming up, either in our ownership or other commercial ownership.
Okay, Mr. Morgan.
Thank you very much. So my background is property industry, property consultancy, national and overseas. And through that, I ended up leading my organisation to go to MIPIM for the best part of a decade before taking the decision to stop going to MIPIM because it had substantially changed, was now occupied or dominated almost by Eastern European money, particularly Russian money, but also I have to say it was excruciating going around Cannes and seeing, to be frank, it was full of Russian hookers. It was awful. And dominated by a huge number of middle-aged English men going out there and drinking to their capacity and slapping backs, etc. It was painful, absolutely painful. So I have to say, and I decided a while ago that to be frank, MIPIM was just the least constructive place to go to actually do business, because the mentality of the people going there was just focused on having a great time, and you know, the excuse was that that's where property industry went to do business. Obviously, it didn't happen for a couple of years during the pandemic, and strange enough, the property industry carried on. So it sort of proves a point, which is actually the absence of MIPIM didn't necessarily bring everything to a grinding halt. I have to say, I was particularly horrified when I used to go, because from a private consultancy perspective, the number of public sector organisations, councils in particular, back in the day, it was the sort of tail end of the regional development boards as well. But I have to say, I always looked at them and thought, what a fundamental waste of public money that those organisations were sending quite large teams, quite often with councillors, to sit on very expensive yachts, quite often paid for by public funds, and to drink capacity and have a well over time. It just seemed almost immoral. I have to say, having seen reference to MIPIM and your comments as well, I absolutely would say I would be horrified that our council tax money from residents is being spent sending people to MIPIM. It's probably the best part, realistically, with the attendance ticket price, the accommodation, the flights, food and drink and everything out of there. I mean, if you get a spare of probably £10,000 or £15,000 per person that's being sent, I would be stunned. It used to be £10,000 back when I stopped going. Plus also the fact that you're taking somebody out of a week's time. I'd just like to express that feeling to the rest of the committee, because probably not everyone is aware of what MIPIM's like, but having experienced it, I have to say I cannot stress enough how horrified I am that any organisation, any public body is still sending people to it. It is not a suitable organisation for serious marketing or connections with property industry. And whilst I appreciate some people enjoy it, my personal experience and experience of many people I know is that it is not a productive place to do business, particularly for local authorities.
Okay. Obviously, I've got a different experience of MIPIM, because I've only attended working for a local authority, and when I've been previously working for a local authority, we've got to ensure that we're keeping spend to an absolute minimum. And I've even got the costs of what the plans are for MIPIM next year. We don't stay in Cannes. You've got to get up at 5:30 in Nice so that you can get a train, so you can jump on a train, because that's significantly cheaper. So you're talking £39 a bed night instead of hundreds of pounds a bed night. That's my experience of MIPIM. And then you work the way through till 10 o'clock at night to get the last train. So the long days, I don't see MIPIM personally as a pleasurable experience, and I never have, because it's hard graft. You're doing it on a shoestring, you don't claim on any council expenses. You pay it all out of your own pocket. You're away from your family for 4 or 5 nights. I don't see it as a pleasurable experience. I see it as it's going to help me in my job. It puts me in an opportunity where you can get the highest people within the organisation. You can lead, the key thing to MIPIM is making sure your diary is absolutely chock-a-block from morning until night with the people that you want to engage with. In terms of our costs, if we was to not attend the event, as in go into the Palais, it's £800 per person. That includes accommodation, that includes flights, that includes everything for that 4 periods, even your transfers to and from the airport. If you go into the Palais, it's an extra £1,200. But again, I've only experienced working with MIPIM and doing it on an absolute shoestring, because again, you're absolutely right. This is public money, and we need to ensure that public money is spent in the right way, and we make the most out of the attendance by making sure your diaries, you're booked up. You're getting your press releases all lined up for when you do attend there, so you get the most out of it. So like I say, from my own personal experience, but again, I've only gone as a local authority organisation. I've never been on a yacht, I don't put myself, and previously I've never been in any of those situations where you're putting yourself out there in those positions, because we've got to be mindful that this is public money. So again, my experience is very different to yours. All I would say is, if the decision is to move to MIPIM and that is agreed, we would be conducting ourselves in the same way and sending 2 people, not an army of people, 2 people to MIPIM during that period of time. And that's my experience and my response to that question.
Mr. Galton. Thank you, Chairman. Well, Jonathan raises some interesting points. I can confirm that previously the leader of the council did used to go. I can remember it, and we had a report to council. So I guess this needs to be a political decision as to whether we attend or not, in the light of what we've learnt this morning. I hope that will be reflected on by the current leader. But my question was about, obviously this has been quite successful in job creation. Just looking down here, DPD, 750 jobs, and so on and so forth. But of course, that's job creation. I'm just wondering if we know if it's been possible to fill those vacancies, given the problem that a lot of companies are having with vacancy filling at the moment. So that's the first thing. And the second question was really to Tom. Of course, this service that now, this was outsourced originally, wasn't it, Tom? We had a private company that did that, and there was some concerns about that, particularly how it was working in Leicestershire and how effective it is. Do you think this in-house model, this partnership with the City Council, is proving to be more effective?
And my answer to that question is yes, I do. We did used to contract an organisation to provide this service, and that organisation still exists actually, and isn't contracted by us, although I think 1 or 2 of the districts do have a contractual relationship with them around some tactical issues. So that organisation does provide tactical, if you like, an operational support to the place marketing sector. But what we felt at that time, when we carried out a review and we engaged with the sector around that, was that we needed a more strategic approach, and we felt that that was best delivered and most economically efficiently delivered by the city and county jointly working together to create a team in-house, leaving the organisation that we previously contracted to provide that more sort of grassroots tactical support to local companies, and that seems to work quite well as a combination. And what we're doing now, and Mike mentioned it earlier, is taking advantage of some of the strategic opportunities that are coming along. For example, the opportunity to become a destination development partnership. I think that's the name. Which if we can get through that short list of the final 2 and become the one that's chosen by the government, that would put us in a really strong position to move that strategic work forward.
In terms of against that number, I don't have the data here and now as to if 5% below, 6% below, but I can get you that information. What I do know is that obviously that particular business that you picked out is in an area where we do have a skills network that's established, and their job is to get as high to that number as they physically can do. But I don't have the facts and figures here and now.
I think that, following on what Terry said, that would be helpful in part of your wanting to have more data.
Absolutely.
To measure this against in the future. And I think, yeah, job creation is great, but are they able to fill the vacancies? Is it skills, or is it just people, attracting people? Because the danger, as has been said before, and rehearsed at Magna Park, when we looked at that, the distance people were travelling in order to find jobs there, they were coming from the far side of Warwickshire and right down as far as Milton Keynes and so on, to take up work. And yeah, okay, a job's a job, but it's not really very sustainable. Thinking about going forward and sustainability, saving energy in the green agenda.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think the key is as well is once that that job has been filled as well, it's making sure that we've got that career path for the individual so they can move onwards and upwards within the organisation, and ensuring that we've got all of our training providers who can then pick up that relationship beyond then, so that that business, for sake of argument, are making the use of their apprenticeship levy to upskill the workers, make sure that those workers are going through all their internal policies and processes so that they can move onwards and upwards within the organisation. And again, trying to capture that and revisit that data, working with the training providers beyond the them just getting that job.
I thought it might be helpful if I just provided an update on county council attendance at MIPIM. Mr. Galton referenced the leader attended, and the leader did attend a couple of times, but I think the most recent time, I think he attended twice, and the most recent one I think was 2017. So it's quite a while now since that happened, and that was at the specific request of local private sector businesses who were attending, who wanted the leader and the city mayor to front the delegation, if you like, from Leicester. But I think it's subsequently been felt by them that that's not the best use of their time or the best use of public money. Since then, county council attendance has tended to be in the form of just one officer, and certainly the last couple of years, that's been somebody from the property section within the council, looking at specific opportunities around property. But we do review it each year, and not least because we often get freedom of information requests about how much we've spent on MIP, we absolutely do look to keep the cost to a minimum.
Paige.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the very detailed report. A couple of comments on the basis of Councillor Morgan's comment. I think, and what has been said, I still think that it doesn't make any difference, but we need to focus on outcomes, because we are spending taxpayers' public money, and we have to justify that. In relation to Councillor Galton's comment, I happen to be, Magna Park is in my division. I sleep and breathe Magna Park. And I find it most, yes, and I find it most annoying that all of these reports constantly focus and use it, job creation, as a justification. It should not be about job creation. It should be about sustainability and retention and opportunities, because Councillor Galton quite rightly said, we have got people travelling from everywhere. A majority of our employees are from Wales even, and they come. And what we do have is the last time I looked, there were people get counted of Leicestershire when they have a Leicestershire address, but those addresses are of bed and breakfast. And so we have got vacancies of over 1,000 a day that cannot be filled. We have got an unemployment rate of 300, and there are people. So the focus needs to be very much on sustainability. Now, the unit as such presents a great report, but actually, to me, what are the outcomes? DPS would have come to Magna Park and Hinckley anyway. So what are the outcomes of the unit? Where is the value? Is the unit a facilitator? Is the unit an enhancer? And I think that is not quite clear. It's the outcome of what the unit actually does to me. But my main point is exactly the same as I just made to the lab. How, going back to the balance, what's the balance between promoting all of these big businesses in relation to rural businesses, tourism? Because, for instance, a lot of our economy is built on tourism, on small businesses. So where do you see yourself enhancing that, and how can you facilitate and promote that? And my last point on that is, under your undercover story and your travel trade, you are listing quite a lot of things which have been promoted. Now, when I looked into this, I'm a quite active councillor, and I didn't know of any of these things and how they were promoted. So I looked, and it was online, by YouTube and whatever. And I will repeat exactly what I said a minute ago. I do not go, and nor do my residents or people, on the marketing website or on the LEP website to have a look at what the Neville Holt Opera is doing, or the Market Town Heritage Trail. So how do you promote and enhance and ensure it goes out there to get the wider coverage rather than just online? And thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, both really good points, particularly around how do we ensure that rural businesses also are involved in these campaigns. I think it's fair to say that particularly since the tourism growth plan was launched, that was a key challenge we needed to try and unpick, and the campaigns have been developed in a way to be as inclusive as possible. So things such as fitcation is to ensure that any venue, doesn't matter how big they are, they could be, a small enterprise, can get engaged in campaigns such as this. So it's not based on size; it's based on a business that has an offer that'd like to be part of that particular campaign. We can't include everybody. We'd love to. There'll be some businesses that don't just quite fit, but then there may be another campaign that fits for them. But the campaigns themselves have been generated in that way to be as inclusive as possible. I mean, when it comes to a city and county split, I think this is worth sharing as well. Over the last 3 big campaigns, whether it be the Travel Trade Guide, or the Uncover the Story, or it be Fitcation, to give you a flavour of the city and county split, 71% of the businesses that was engaged in Group Travel Guide were from the county. 68% of the businesses on Uncover the Story were county, and Fitcation, 80% were county versus that city split. We have got that, the spread, and that's what we're trying to encourage from these particular campaigns. So that's the first bit, and then the second bit is, sorry, could you just the last part of your question was? Yes, no. The majority of that is reliant on the partners that are part and parcel of the campaign. So we do have a marketing network that they will share with their localities as well, whether it be flyers in local stores, community groups. If they're more rural, we do rely on our partners for getting the message out there as well. And we do share things like such as that we'll do flyer drops to them and they will distribute them. So it's not just reliant on online activity.
So if I may just come back, so really the unit, as you are indicating, is a facilitator towards outcomes. Am I correct in assuming that? And so if you're doing that, do you monitor what these people are doing to ensure that there is that sort of effect?
Yeah, I think we don't. Obviously, we have groups and we have actions that are established in terms of monitoring if those individuals have actually done each activity. We've not got a monitoring process in place. I don't think we've got the resource to do that across all of our venues, but it is a partnership where we are encouraging those businesses to work with their network to share that information. Of course, we are a facilitator. Our job is to pull the campaigns together to get the interest, and we will put marketing budget behind those campaigns to promote them as far and wide as we can. And again, we're not just trying to promote those campaigns to local residents, we're trying to attract investment from outside as well. So we've got key target areas within drive times to try and bring spend into the area. It's not just localised.
Thank you. Mrs.
Thank you, Chair. I'm about to write this down. I was really distracted by Jonathan's revelations. So I suppose the key things for me is when you look at the promoting Leicester and Leicestershire to the business community, what are the key barriers that they bring to you, and how do you work to resolve those? We've heard earlier on, and it's something that's incredibly well known. I worked at Business Link many moons ago. Micro businesses is a huge part of Leicester and Leicestershire's economy. So we've done an awful lot of work to attract a few jobs here, and I'm not suggesting they're only small, but there's some quite big land take for some of the jobs at creation. We're using up to 525,000 square foot for 250 jobs. It seems a huge amount of space for new jobs. What are we doing to grow micro businesses? Because actually doubling from 2 employees to 4 is a huge step forward for that organisation and creates growth within the economy too. How do we do that? And are we doing that? It feels to me maybe there's a bit of a gap. And in terms of tourism, there's a huge amount on tourism, and that's very much locally driven. Do we have a sense of the increase in visitor numbers based on actually just advertising this? Is there a direct correlation, and how are you using that direct correlation to look forward for future promotion?
Okay. So the first one, in terms of the barriers that we face, I would probably say the single biggest barrier that we would face across all of our sort of tourism venues is the ability to share what's happening across the whole of the patch, so that again everybody is fully versed on what is happening within that particular area. Yes, we've got our own campaigns, and that is one way to say, look, for the month of summer, vacation will be the key thing that everybody pulls together to promote. But one thing that we're trying to do, and again, it's through collaboration, which is why we're, one of the reasons for setting up the Tourism Advisory Board, and then a spin-off from that is the a marketing group. Some of the key venues will share their activities, is so that we can better promote that. So, for example, if I've got an event happening on the Saturday, you've got one on the Sunday, why don't we pull together our resources so that we can encourage bed nights between the Saturday and the Sunday? So that's one of the barriers we need to overcome to better coordinate that. We've not got the solution at the moment. We've got an event site that we're currently going to invest in, which scrapes various different websites to put everything in one place to better coordinate that. But I would probably say that's our biggest single barrier. In terms of the new start entrepreneur, those businesses, I think it's fair to say that we work closely with the LEP on those particular businesses to ensure that we are forwarding them on to growth advisors, and growth advisors will then pick up some of the smaller inward investment activities. I think that's just more of a resource issue, which is why we pass them over to the growth advisors, who can then sit down with them, and obviously they will work with the local authority area to see what managed workspace they've got available. We will do property searches for those businesses as well, and we can give them the information. But I've got to be honest, it's more of a light touch for the the 1 and 2 man bands, just from a resourcing perspective. And then your final question was around.
My final question really was about space. I mean, we're using an awful lot of space to generate quite low level numbers of jobs. How are we making sure that we are bringing forward businesses that are, my work life, I got 2,800 square foot for 40 members of staff, and on a hybrid working model. There's some in here that's using significant amount of space. How are you balancing that off in terms of making sure we're getting high quality jobs and not using as much resource for those jobs?
Okay. There are elements of this that runs into spatial planning, and I'm not a planning officer from a spatial planning perspective. All I would say is, in regards to that particular question, is while some of those units may take more in terms of space, It's what goes on within that space that can be important. So, for example, it might be highly automated, but then on the flip side, you tend to find if it's highly automated, the quality of the jobs is significantly higher because there might be sort of technicians that would be obviously fixing the technology, and therefore the average salary rates might be 80,000 as opposed to a lower rate. But in terms of how that's being managed across the county, that's probably more of a spatial planning question than myself.
You want to come back for clarification?
Yes. Excuse me for coming back, but in your reply to me, you just said you put marketing budgets behind those initiatives. So could you elaborate on those marketing budgets? Where do they come from and where are they accounted for and how does it work? Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So in terms of key council, so there's a contribution between the city and the county. On average, for the last couple of years, the marketing spend's been around £100,000 per annum for the whole of the year, and that's almost a 50-50 split between the city and county. And that marketing spend will be over a range of different things. It could be literatures, publicity, could be advertising campaigns that are delivered. It could be targeted social media campaigns to again target a particular area. So, for example, in the report, it talks about geo-targeting. So during the Fitcation campaign, it was during the summer around the Commonwealth Games. So what we did is targeted visitors of the Commonwealth Games with the Fitcation campaign. So we were able to target where they were in Birmingham with their mobile phones, so that when they opened up social media, the Fitcation was on their mobile phone. And again, trying to encourage additional spend and travel to the area. So that gives you a flavour as to the makeup of that spend for marketing.
Thank you to all members for their questions on this item, and to Mike and Sarah for presenting, and Tom as well. That's the end of item 9, which moves us on to item 10, which is the medium-term financial strategy monitoring, period 6, which starts on page 71 of your paperwork. Chris Cambini, the Director of Corporate Resources, will introduce his item, and he is joined by Declan Keegan, Assistant Director. We also have the lead member for Resources, Mr. Brecken, attending today. So, Chris, do you want to start on this item?
I'm going to do my usual and pass over to Declan, who will take us through the report.
Thanks, Chris. So the report just covers period 6, and we've also got a couple of pages in there just about sort of asset challenge, which I'll come on to in a minute. So the report really is just an overview of where we were sort of like halfway through the year. And you'll see that it's a £5 million improvement on period 4 to leave with it's still a concerning £8 million overspend, but obviously it is better than it was. And the overspend against the high need grants is an area that's dropped off by a couple of £1 million. It still leaves us spending £9 million more than the grant that we get in this year. And just to sort of to put that in context for members, that's £40 million that we've accumulated in sort of excess grant spend over the last the last 4 years now, when we get to the end of this financial year. Next area, children and family services. Spend has worsened slightly to leave us about £3 million overspent. And the concern here is that it's continuing to be more expensive to place children, and also more expensive to obtain the staff to sort of look after those children as well. The adult social care overspend is one of the ones that sort of the reduction of that by 4 million is obviously the big reason why sort of the position has got better overall. But it's still concerning because the demand, although the demand and income have improved, we've only been able to get to this position after £26 million of growth was put into this sort of service area, and that's normally the sort of the amount of growth that the entire council takes up, never mind just one department. So although it's balanced, it's sort of it was an area we were hoping would actually come under this year after all the COVID reduction. Environment and transport positions £2 million worse. Transport's the main cause of this, and in some ways this just kind of replicates the position that you've seen in the sort of the caring services that they're kind of, as they're struggling to get SEND and social care transport. The costs we're hoping it's much higher, but that's no surprise if you're pushing a lot of demand through a marketplace. Corporate resources, slight improvement, but school food is still a particular concern about sort of the trading, that sort of or financial performance of that business that's going through there. So whilst the sorry, I can't even read my own writing now. So whilst the reduction in the overspend is sort of is helpful, and it does mean that we're kind of not consuming ourselves as quickly as we sort of first feared, there's little in there that encourages the long-term position. So that's, I suppose that's the main thing I sort of draw to members' attention, that sort of the long-term position is still extremely worrying for the council, and there isn't much of cheer in there to suggest that the sort of the predictions are wrong at the moment. In capital, there's nothing I'll draw out on there. There's nothing particularly of concern. There's a bit of sort of slippage and sort of cancellations going on, but nothing major. And then finally, there's a couple of pages on the assets. What we did there is there was quite a level of interest from members about what we're doing to sort of review assets and making sure we're making the most of that sort of the properties that we do own. What the proposal is we do an all-member briefing every sort of year, sort of just a little bit before sort of Christmas time, when the MTFS report comes out. And what we were going to do was get a few property people along to there, so members can kind of get into a bit of detail with them if they want. So I suppose consider this as a bit of an appetizer, but we will get kind of property colleagues along. So if members do want to get into sort of specific assets, they can kind of ask on a sort of I don't know, either a group basis, one-to-one basis, or whatever works best for members. So that's all I was going to say by way of introduction, and whether Chris or the lead member wants to add anything.
Thank you, Declan. I think all I'd add is I think the whole year monitoring throughout the Scrutiny Commission over the year will be challenging. I think because of inflation and higher costs. So I think it's a good report in a sense. Yeah, last month was 13 million overspent. This month we're down to 8, and obviously Declan and the report has covered why that is. So, but I think we are at challenging times at the moment. So.
Okay, thank you. Over to Mr. Galton.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, yeah, the situation is still looking very depressing as a result of inflation and the additional demands and costs, particularly with regard to the SEN. And paragraph 11 talks about this work, and we're in this programme that the DFE set up. Could you say a bit more about that? The bit at the end is worrying when you say that if we have to contribute to the deficit reduction, as has been the case for other authorities. So is the government's expectation is that we will deal with this, is it? And that there won't be more money coming from the centre, from central government to help with that? And if that is the case, to Lee, what are we doing to get that message across to MPs and so on, that this, I mean, you say in the report, I don't need to repeat it, the situation is not sustainable. We can't continue to manage this sort of deficit. Now that's that side of it. The other side of it is that this area of service is just not working. I mean, the number of complaints we're now getting as members, never mind the staff, having to deal with these SEN cases, more and more children getting these plans, and then the provision not working. Now, I know later you're talking about how we're trying to address that, and I'll come to that on capital shortly. The solution to this is surely to carry on increasing in-house, or not in-house, but provision in the county, local provision that we have more control over and more say over, working with partners and schools. Now, you say in there that we're bidding for an awful lot of money for another school. It all sounds very secretive, this. Can you tell us where this school is going to be, on land owned by the county council? What sort of school this is going to be? Will we have to do the usual, what's it called, contest for an academy provider to come forward to operate this school? And how confident are you that we will be successful in achieving these capital resources to build this school, and what sort of timescale, if we are? And what if we're not successful? Have we done the number crunching? I mean, we're going to talk about having to borrow very large sums of money to deliver a road later, but have we done the number crunching on, if we didn't get this money, that we should actually carry on and provide this school anyway? Because in the long term, there will be considerable benefits, both in terms of meeting the needs of children with special needs, but also helping to control the budget. I realise there's quite a lot there, Chairman. I do think this area does need more scrutiny, needs more looking at, not just in the short term, but the long. This county had one of the best records for SEN not that many years ago. I'm sad to say that when that is going downhill, we are not maintaining that, and something's got to change. Thank you.
There was a lot there. I'll do my best. So in terms of SEN generally, you've heard me say this before, this is a major issue. It's probably the biggest issue we face as a council, single kind of as a single issue. So in terms of delivering better value in SEND, so we're invited to the programme. There's about 50 authorities in that programme. We get a small contribution in terms of kind of transformation resource to enable us to kind of pursue that programme. But what we're doing is actually a pretty big intervention in terms of the SEND service for the reasons that you've outlined. So we've appointed Newton Europe to do some significant work, and if you include our in-house resources as well, we're probably looking at an investment in the order of kind of £9 million that we're going to put into SEND. Both to kind of look at some of the service issues you allude to within that service, and to try and reduce the demand that's arising from EHCPs and the cost that that's causing us. So the key issue is rising demand, and I'll come on to the capital programme kind of now. So the key issue is rising demand, and what we need to do is to shift that resource leftward. And again, you've heard me say this before, so we've got less children going into independent special schools, less children going into our own special schools, and more children being supported within mainstream education as a kind of key kind of plank of the programme. At the same time, supply is important, and in the special school that you kind of highlight is on a site in Cornwall. But it is relatively small. That is not going to solve our issues. I say the issue is around reducing demand rather than increasing the supply of places, although that has its part to play. So in terms of whether that's going to be successful, that bid, I mean, I can't give any assurance. It goes into a DFE kind of bidding process. The one thing is for certain, that is going to take some time because it'll have to kind of wind its way through the DFE. And then if we get a positive outcome, it's going to take a little while to kind of get that out the ground and built and occupied. So that is going to be some years off in terms of bringing on extra supply of places. I say the key issue for us is reducing demand. And again, you've heard me say this before. This isn't just our problem. This is a problem that all local government or tier authorities are facing in terms of increasing demand around EHCPs.
So thank you, Chair. Can I just come back on paragraph 11 then? So this programme, and we're part of this, but is the expectation still that we will have to meet the deficit as a council? What's the purpose of this programme that the DFE set up if it's not to help resolve this forecast deficit? What is it now? 39 million.
Apologies, I didn't pick that element up. So the DFE they've kind of got two programs. The one is called the safety valve program, and within that program, they're the really challenged authorities that have really big deficits, and probably a lot of those deficits are actually kind of bigger than their kind of overall reserve level. And as part of that safety valve program, that's when the DFE will actually put a bit of contribution in to kind of address some of that historic deficit, on the basis that those authorities aren't going to have a chance to really kind of pull that around. We're not in that programme, so we're in the middle tier, which is called the Delivering Better Value in SEND. Even if you and I think the way they all operate is, I think some authorities will move from that kind of Delivering Better Value programme to the Safety Valve programme because their deficits are going to be so big. We might well end up being one of those authorities. I am aware there are some authorities in that middle tier programme that are in a worse position than us. So when or if we go up, I'm not entirely certain. The issue is once you go into the safety valve programme, there is an expectation that you will use some of your own county council or council resources as part of kind of putting right that historic deficit. So we are expecting that if we do end up in that programme, the DfE will have a conversation with us. They will look at our balances, they will look at our reserves, and they'll say, well, we kind of think that you should put X million pounds into paying off some of that historic deficit, and we'll put this amount in. We're also aware that some of that kind of sorting that historic deficit, there is a need for sometimes a transfer from other parts of the schools block to help pay off the SEND deficit. So it could be a whole package of proposals, but the expectation is they will be asking us to put some of our own resources in.
Mrs. Hack.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, quite similar line of questioning to Simon. I don't know whether, Chair, it's worthwhile us having a much more detailed paper on SEND, because this has been a feature of this commission since I joined. We've had transport, we've had complaints, we've obviously got a continual concern about the deficit budget position on the budget. Whether or not something that brings it all together might be useful for the committee. I suppose the thing for me very much is that it feels very frustrating sitting here as a councillor when we deal with casework, and we can see through our casework that it feels that the special educational needs areas can become a little bit dysfunctional. You know, I've been dealing with a piece of casework on transport for a child who's been given a place that drives past a school to go to somewhere else in the county. So because the SEND process was done inefficiently and slowly, they've lost a space really local to that family, and now having to access transport services to go somewhere else, which is much further away. So I think it feels to me as if we need to really examine this in greater detail. Do we know what I understand there's a white paper due to be published. It's looking at right support, right place, right time in one of those orders. I don't know which one it is. How will we respond to that as a challenge? And I suppose the last point is, we know we have an issue around special educational needs in terms of provision. We've got a lot of youngsters in the independent sector, which costs us more per school year than our own provision. How are we looking to reduce that independent provision? And then on point 71, we've got surplus school sites are being brought to market in Hinckley, Wigston and Earl Shilton. Would those sites not be better used to continue the expansion of SEND places with our own portfolio? I don't know. I know it doesn't quite work like that. My other question is, the other area of pressure seems into the early years area. Can you elaborate a bit further of how that's come about and what work's been done to reduce that pressure there, please?
Let's try and pick those up in turn. In terms of kind of bringing some further information back. I mean, it could. I mean, I know it's a financial issue, but clearly it's a service issue. Whether it's here or at the Children and Young Persons, Children and Families kind of committee, I'm not sure, but maybe that's something we can discuss outside the meeting. But yeah, I'm more than happy to bring something back. In terms of the white paper, I mean, these reforms that were actually introduced back in 2014, and it was pretty apparent within 2 or 3 years that there was an increase in demand associated with them. There's been a few false starts with government legislation to try and address those issues. And I suppose the latest white paper, which I think came out probably about 6 months ago, or green paper, it's from my perspective, I haven't read it. I don't think there's anything that's going to particularly put this right anytime soon. Would be my kind of take on the green paper. So I kind of think you can't rely on that to address the issues. I think what we need to do is to try and look at our local system, the way we work in terms of systems and practices, and kind of address it that way rather than wait for anything to come from central government. In terms of the issue you raised about kind of, I suppose, more places. I mean, more places does have its part, and I'm not going to kind of belittle it as an issue, but I think the issue is demand. It is demand. It is about that leftward shift and trying to get more people supported within mainstream schools rather than placed within independent places or indeed within our own special schools. I think that is the key issue. That it does have its place, but it's not going to solve it. And actually, the first part of the programme that we did as an authority was more focused on getting more places. which we did, and that was successful. I can't remember the figures in terms of the increase in places, but clearly we just filled up those places, you know, and I think the focus needs to be on that leftward shift of reducing demand.
I suppose then that's the other challenge then, isn't it, is the provision of support in the school sector. We already know that the school sector is increasingly under pressure. We have schools in Leicestershire on the funding floor, both primary and secondary. We've seen that SEND applications have increased in the primary sector, which means the primary sector actually, rather than pulling children and keeping children within mainstream schooling, which is what we're advocating for, actually seeing children struggle earlier, and therefore the demand actually has been, my understanding, is in the primary sector, not necessarily at secondary sector. So I suppose we have an increased demand. 16% of children would identify as having a special educational need. We know lots of children successfully are maintained in mainstream, but the retraction in funding in education doesn't help us here. So how will we, as an, we talk about fair funding a lot for our own authority. Fair funding in the schooling sector is something that Leicestershire also does really poorly on. I know we keep going and asking for more money and more money. It's just about fair position of money. You know, if you were to look at Leicestershire against Nottingham City, is they still have TAs. Most of our schools don't have them anymore, just general TAs, and it creates huge amount of pressure in schools managing SEND. So how do we face that challenge when we know every other budget is also under pressure?
It's kind of an impossible question to answer in some respects. So I think members are aware that Leicestershire schools aren't the highest funded. They are kind of relatively low funded. The one thing I would say on SEN is unusually for Leicestershire, actually. The last time I looked, I think we're kind of mid-term in terms of the capital spend in terms of SEN. So I think there probably are more things we can do about making the overall budget work better for us. But you are right, it is difficult when you're working with schools that are low funded in terms of kind of how you make it work and how you get that kind of leftward shift to work. But in terms of the overall SEN budget, we are kind of mid-tier, I'd say, in terms of spend per capita. So I think there is something we can do around kind of making that budget work far more effectively and get the system to work far more effectively.
Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going on a bit of a memory test here, so you have to bear with me. So paragraph 59, where we talk about the rural sector is currently expected to return around 450,000 net income. Now, last time I sat on this committee, I have a vague recollection, well, in fact, not a vague recollection, quite a good recollection, that on one of our rural settings, a farm, we're having to pay in excess of £2 million to clear it up. So are we saying that the income for the year should have been closer to 3 million quid? Or are we actually saying that's not net income? That's ignoring the fact we've got to pay a clean up, and we've done what we usually do in such things, to put them in another budget that we never see, to distort it. Now, if we then go down to paragraph 71, I think it is, where we're talking about lands where we're looking to properly identify whether or not there's a benefit to this council in developing some of the land it owns. And I think there are probably 4 or 5 quite significant sites there. We must have some indication of the land value that we would get for those sites, subject to planning permission, etc. And it rather calls into question to me the opening capital value of 28 million on the rural land, which perhaps should have been updated by the indications of what we might gain from the sale of that land, which would show the percentage forecast return even worse than it is. So if we haven't included the 2 million, we've actually got a net return, haven't we, of somewhere in the region of 6 or 8% on rural property. If we then add in the accrued value of the land based on those we could sell, it's probably doubled the value of our rural pot. So in actual fact, would we not be better off disposing of most of that rural land, putting the money in the bank, earning 3 or 4% on it, and being quids in? And so question number 1, is that a net figure? And if it is, it makes it look better. Or where have we put the £2.5 million clean-up costs? Then on my second one, if I can find the paragraph, I think it is, I think it's 67. about this building, about the potential rental. It would certainly assist me to understand what capital could be acquired from selling the land versus renting it out to another area. So I appreciate we're talking about going for a, but I'm not aware that this committee or any other scrutiny committee has yet done any scrutiny of the ways of working programme, or indeed had any detailed reports on it. So will there be a point at which point a detailed report on ways of working comes to this committee for scrutiny? Because I haven't worked out yet where and how it's being scrutinised by who.
You're going to have to tell me if I missed some. So the first farm, first farm was the incident you're sort of referring to, where there was the sort of the big cleanup operation, and that was provisioned for last year. So if you remember, when we sort of did the outturn report, we took the whole of that hit in one go, even though the sort of the costs haven't necessarily been incurred yet. So the figures that you're seeing there, that net figure isn't net of the first farm, that's net of other operating costs. You know, inspections of the sites, things like that. So that is a fair figure to use in terms of sort of the return that you get from sort of on a revenue basis from the farm. So it's not being distorted by that sort of first farm figure. That was sort of taken care of last year. And which is where the 2.5 is. Some of it was we provide money because we know issues are going to happen. You know, you've got a £200 million property portfolio. You're going to get things, whether it's kind of, you know, first farm's an extreme, but you do even get just sort of tenants coming to the end of leases and you're having to sort of reinvest to get a new tenant in there. So we always set some money aside in what's called a sinking fund to allow this to happen. So the bulk of that we had accrued, and obviously it cleaned out the sinking fund. So now in the case of it, each year in year out, we'll add a little bit more money to that. So when the next issue comes along, you know, we've got money to sort of deal with it rather than being sort of in a panic situation, as it were. And you touched on the value of the farmland. This, I have to admit, this is a little bit beyond me. It's sort of Rick's obviously set the rules around asset valuations, and it tends to be the trigger around things like planning permission. So for a few of those sites there that you've mentioned, they haven't had the planning permission sort of actually granted yet, so we can't uplift the value. But you are right, when that planning permission does come through, we do feed it into that table to show that capital appreciation. And it does tend to kind of go hand in hand with that point about, is it the right time to sort of dispose of that site? And again, on some of those sort of areas there, we'll talk with developers and we'll work out, you know, what is the right time to dispose of it, because like you say, there's no point just having a paper gain if actually you can turn it into a real cash gain. But often with the farmland, it's kind of it is a long-term gain. Even if you think you're going to get planning, it can be kind of a decade or more before it actually comes through. And obviously there's a function of the farmland as well. In terms of, you picked up paragraph 67, so that relates to obviously the County Hall campus, and the sort of the analysis that we've done does suggest that kind of if you were to dispose of the site in its entirety, the sort of the demolition cost of a sort of a building like this does reduce the capital value that you get. That said, it still would be sort of worth a significant value. But when you compare that to the cost then of finding a new site and building a sort of a brand new building, it would mean that it would require quite a significant capital investment, you know, sort of in the tens of millions of pounds. Obviously, there's an awful lot on this site, you know, whether it's sort of the data centre or just this kind of, you know, facilities like this, which are quite unusual for buildings. So you get into sort of the bespoke arrangements. In terms of the running costs of the site, you're right to pull out the rental costs, because if we weren't getting rental income, we've suddenly got an oversized building, which then costs you year in, year out more than you need to do. So the plan is to get as much rental income as we can for this site, which means then it kind of, I suppose, washes its face and justifies having the larger building than we need for the county council operations. And that is something that we do need to be kind of strict with ourselves of kind of continually kind of looking at that. We'll enter into, you know, leases with public sector organisations, which helps from the reducing the sort of the risk of them going bust. And it tends to, they're also more willing to enter into sort of long-term kind of rental arrangements. We're not entering sort of into sort of hand-to-mouth situations. So whilst the rental income looks good, financially is the right thing to keep the County Hall campus. If that position changed on the rental income, we'd have to revisit it. In terms of the scrutiny of that, ways of working has been to this committee. I can't remember when, it might have been quite a while ago, but we can sort of bring a paper back if that's sort of what members want in terms of having a look at progress, because it's not just about the gaining the rental income, it is about sort of the adaptation to sort of, you know, people coming home and things like that. So there is wider interest to it as well.
understand, I can understand we've got different pots, but then what we're actually doing is we're putting money into a sinking fund, which should actually be shown against the income as a reduction in cost, because you're still accruing for the money. So what we're actually saying is quite cleverly is we get this income in, and let's call it 5 million quid. We put £1 million in the sinking pot to cover any big losses like the farm, etc. Now, to me, the net revenue benefit to us is 4 million quid. We're still showing it as 5 because we never actually showed £1 million. So it actually distorts the income figures for us to make proper decisions on. I wasn't suggesting for a minute that we got rid of the whole of the campus, but could we be more creative? So selling part of the campus would then actually give us sufficient money to bring the records office in-house, do the amendments to the Eastern Annex. We could then sell the land in Oadby, which would probably pay for the costs of doing that by putting some flats on it. And I'm just concerned that at this current financial stricture times, are we looking in detail enough and are we scrutinised enough on what we might, how we might potentially sweat our assets to a far greater level than we currently do, which we desperately need to do at this time. And I'm not suggesting we sell assets, get the capital and just blow it. What we need to do is then invest that to give us the return in other things at a better rate than we've currently got here. And I'm not convinced in this report that we get the information or see the benefit enable us to do that, is what concerns me, which is why I think perhaps we might need to do some more in-depth diving on various aspects and look at them in more detail. But to me, if we paid out 2.8 million, all right, we're taking it out of sinking fund, but it's still money we spent. So the net return on those assets, in my world, I mean, if you were renting out your own property, you wouldn't say, well, I've got no rental income this year, but don't worry, what I saved up at the rent last year, I've now spent, that's fine, which is what we appear to be doing.
I'm not really sure where you get those figures from, to be quite honest. So it is very standard practice to not just sort of assume that just because you have a good year or any year in truth that you're never going to have sort of problems in the future. So we've obviously got sort of leases, so that have a sort of a finite period of time. So we do put money aside, and it is standard practice to just put that money aside. So year in, year out, you're building up a pot, so you're not suddenly getting big spikes in your expenditure. And it's not something I'd recommend that we'd change in any sort of way, shape or form.
Sorry, but if I made myself, I'm not suggesting otherwise. I'm saying we're doing it right. But what I'm saying is where that money comes from, we take out the central budget. Whereas to me, it should be allocated against the income on the capital assets we've got. So I'm not suggesting for a minute we don't have a sinking fund. That's perfectly sensible. We all do that sort of thing. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But if we're then going to start filling it up at 400,000 a year, because you now say it's empty, that 400,000 should be offset against the income on those assets. Whereas we don't do that. We take it out of the central budget before we get to this figure.
It doesn't come out of the central budget. The sinking fund's funded by the income that's generated by CAIF. So it is contained in that kind of, that, I suppose, the bubble of CAIF, as it were. So it's got to wash its face. So there's no new money that comes in to sort of compensate. So apologies if I wasn't clear first time round.
It was we were jointly confusing each other, Declan. So my apologies as well, the other way around.
Okay, Mrs. Fryer. Mr. Brecken, did you want to come back?
I think it was just to assure members, I mean, current financial situations. I mean, I think this county council went early with its position of a dire financial situation that we face going forward. And I think every other authority, county council, has sort of followed suit since then. So I think earlier on there's a question about what we're doing on fairer funding. I mean, certainly the leader and the deputy leader are working hard with the MPs, meeting with the MPs. Last week, that facilitated a meeting with the senior government minister, which Chris and John Sinnott dialed into to give them a flavour of the financial position. Perhaps it was because we were a leader in going early on it, but I think everything is on the table. I mean, I said that quite early on. I think the leaders said it. We're looking at everything, and certainly from a costings point of view for the County Hall campus, I mean, there are options available, and a full report is done. But I think for us to decamp from County Hall and use the site for other facilities, you'd probably need to build something like the Access building on the Lucep site in Loughborough, which cost us 25 million to build. You'd need the land as well. You'd probably end up spending twice as much as you get for this whole campus should should we redo that. So as far as looking at uses for this site, we are doing that in the reports that are coming through at the moment. So, and certainly part of the MTFS and the budget process for this coming year has that fully covered. So it's really assurances for members that that is taking place, and certainly Chris and Declan and all the sort of directors and under John's sort of guidance are bringing that together for what will be challenging sort of budget setting coming forward. So
that's right.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to mention property. We all have our own views on what we should and shouldn't be doing. Now I'm going back to the points raised by Mr. Galton and Mrs. Hack regarding particularly the SEND expenditure and the costing and how we're going to, and I'm talking about the Royal, the whole council are going to deal with this. Yes, you're quite right. There is a lot, the requests for SEND and pupil plans are going up far more than they ever had. And quite honestly, personally, I think we could see another rise because the effects of the lockdowns from COVID still have to work their way through. And Mrs. Hack mentioned particularly the primary school children and children entering. Well, a lot of those children are way behind now, and we have to look at that. I can assure them, all councillors here, that the department and the officers are doing their very best under very difficult circumstances to handle these multitude cases, and they're all different, and each child has a different need quite often, and to try and cope with that. I don't think anybody, and I've been involved in this council for some years now, ever expected the increase that we have seen and the demand that we have seen without the extra funding coming in. It's very, very difficult, but we had a scrutiny meeting yesterday of children and families, and a lot of time was spent discussing this. So I would encourage all councillors, if they have any specific, but to just go through the papers we were discussing yesterday. And we have questioned, but there is no quick answer to this, unfortunately. We are doing our very best. That's all I can say. Yes, we would like more money, but countrywide, there is a shortage of staff. We are competing with other councils, other organisations to get the qualified staff. We want high calibre staff. We're not going to put someone in a job just to fill a vacancy. We have got to get the right people to deal with it. We are doing our very best. That's how we're doing everything we can and using any facility to attract staff. Also, because we haven't been able to have as many staff as we would like, regardless of how many we feel we need, is that we're having to we are competitive, but not as competitive as we may be, as other places can be, with the finance side, with the salaries and things, and also to retain staff. People now can earn a lot more money going to agencies. We have to employ agencies. We have to look after these children somehow, and we are doing our very best. That's really what I would like to say. The lead member is here in the audience, and you're more than welcome to attend our scrutiny committees and see what we're really discussing.
Anyone want to come back on Mrs. Pryor's comments, or no? That will move on to Mrs. Page then.
Thank you. I think I may be the last one. Chris, you referred to we can make things, do overall things to make the budget better. And I kind of was focused on page 79 onwards when I was reading this paper. and there is an awful lot of slippage. Now, while some slippage can't be mitigated against, and it is minor, we then move downwards to 0.54. And sorry, I'm moving corporate and property again, and we're talking 12.6 million in net slippage. So I was, and when you're looking under 54, some of this could have been possibly avoided with hindsight. So my question number one, it is how can we corporately work to avoid and mitigate these amounts of slippage? That's question number one. When I'm going down and I'm looking at all of the assets and the overall income, there are quite a few separate figures, but it states that an overall income we have of 2.9%, which makes me, which then refers me to point, hang on a minute, 62 and 66. To ensure that the right areas identified, it's proposed that in the year localities are not necessarily blah, blah, blah. So, and then it goes on to having a camp report later on I think 0.70 something, whereas we are looking at things where we can utilize assets better, I think 0.62. So the second question is, when the new camp recognises that exists a mixed economy and whatever, will we be seeing a report? Are we going to look at how we can get better interest from our assets? And are we possibly looking at disposing of some assets that do not get us a return? Thank you. And thank you, as always, for your report.
So if I take them backwards first, the camp will primarily look at kind of the, I suppose, the operational assets of the county council. So it's not necessarily going to be the sort of the income yielding ones, although some of them may have things like room rentals, stuff like that. But it's going to be primarily, you know, are we making the best use of the sort of the assets we use for our services? So that's what the camp will do. And the intention is to bring back to sort of the committee an annual report to just say on progress, because it's going to take a few years for them to basically work around the county and work around sort of the different sort of types of assets as well, you know, whether it's sort of libraries or sort of office sites like this. So there will be an annual report just updating on progress. In terms of the CAFE itself, so the 2.9 is that bottom line return on the revenue side of things. So the because it's partway through the year, we don't have the capital, so the actual return will be higher. But in answer to your question, that's a revolving process with the CAFE about kind of, are there still the right assets getting the right return for the risk that we're taking on? So that continual kind of sort of cycling should happen, and that's one of the areas that sort of picks up your point in sort of the first question about the slippage. And half of that slippage was the decision not to buy an asset. So although we've got the cash to do it, the decision was actually it was the wrong time to do it in sort of the current environment. So I suppose give you assurance there is a CAFE oversight board that does look at kind of the performance of the fund and kind of challenges whether kind of we're investing in the right things or the timing of disinvestment that may occur. But both of them will have an annual report that will come back, but they'll both run a separate process, one on the operational side and one on more the investment side of things.
If I can just add to that as well, and Declan said in terms of the introduction, I know there is a huge amount of kind of interest in making better use of our assets. So what we're thinking of doing as part of the NTFS all-member briefing that we do, you know, just after settlement, I expect it'll be just before the settlement in December, is we might put an extra kind of session on and we can get into the detail of the assets. So the members can have a good look in terms of what we've got, what we're looking at disposing, so that you can really get into the detail of it. And that's kind of what we're thinking of doing.
Thank you to all members for questions on members for questions on this item, and to Declan, Chris and Lee for responding and presenting. Does anyone have any other comments to make on this item? No. Okay.
Should we take the next report because all of the members are here now?
Did you say you wanted a 5-minute break? Yes. a brief time.
Don't take the order.
What do members want to
The
do?
members, what's the general consensus? Do we want to plough on or take a break or lunch now? Okay, shall we? Okay. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break and come back for the Melton item then. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome back to the meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. So we're moving on to item 11, which is the report on the North and Eastern Melton Mowbray Distributor Road. This report, which is on pages 99 to 116 of your pack, was also considered by the Highway and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee at its meeting on the 3rd of November. A copy of the minute extract outlining the discussion and comments made at that meeting has been circulated to Commission members for information. We are joined by Jana Walker, Assistant Director of Environment and Transport, who will present the item, supported by Declan Keegan, Assistant Director of Corporate Resources. Mr. Brecken, Lead Member for Resources, is present and is joined by the Leader, Mr. Rushton, and the Lead Member for Highways and Transport, Mr. O'Shea. Good afternoon, everyone, and if I hand over to Jana to go ahead, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Sorry about that. Thank you, everybody. Sorry about that. So I won't start again. I'll just carry on in terms of the Melton Mowbray Distributor Road North and East, and I'll no doubt use its acronym MMDR as we go through. Is at the point now where we're preparing to deliver on site, if indeed that's the decision that the council chooses to make, and that decision will be made by Cabinet in December 2022. So the purpose of this report then is to update you on that progress and the implications associated with that decision, and gather your views in preparation for that decision in December. And you mentioned the scheme has usually been the subject of scrutiny by the Highways and Transport Committee. So I'll run through a bit of the background, take you through the options available to the council and the implications of those. And then if okay, perhaps hand over to Declan in case there's any more financial information to cover. So as we've set out in the report, the MMDR North and East scheme has been in development for a number of years, since 2015 really, and is part of a transport strategy developed alongside Melton Borough Council's local plan. The scheme in its current proposed form runs to the north and east of Melton Mowbray, beginning at the A606 Nottingham Road to the north before going round the town, rejoining at the A606 Burton Road to the south. In that form, it's been developed since 2016 onwards, and there's a number of reports available documenting the progress of the scheme and the various approvals sought through key stages. And these include submission of the outline business case to the Department for Transport, the submission of the planning application, and the submission of application for compulsory purchase order, which helps us acquire the land. And that also has public examination. It's worth noting that all of these processes that we've been through with the scheme involve a significant examination of its benefits, its public benefit, its readiness for delivery, and its contribution to the economic success of the county. So a summary of these previous decisions and key milestones, I won't run you through them all, you'll be relieved to know, are set out in paragraphs 2 to 16. Cabinet last received a report in April 22 setting out the next steps following the successful approval of the compulsory purchase and side road orders that made the land available for the scheme. At this time, the latest cost estimates were provided, and we provide an update on the programme, and we were aware obviously of the financial challenges around inflation, and particularly in the construction industry at this time. And we did provide an update that we estimated costs had gone up from the previous 85.3 million estimate with a 5 million contingency to somewhere around 106 million based on the BCIS, General Civil Engineering Cost Index. I have to read that to get it right. So on the basis of that report, and since then, officers have been working to finalise the business case for submission for DFT. And a key thing, just for members' information there, is what this shows us is the work gone into that business case is even with those increased costs, and we'll come on to a bit more detail about those costs later. The scheme remains value for money and delivers significant benefits. So and as far as sort of our colleagues in Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee, those transport benefits and the reasons for delivering the scheme have remained through there. The question is really around then that affordability, and we'll come on to that. So we've also been progressing the land acquisition, completing preparatory works on site, and that's important to maintain the programme, because as you know, as soon as we get delay now in programme, the effective inflation is quite significant. And we've also been finalising the contractual arrangements, including target price for the construction contract. So as I've said, a key part of that work is this target price. The construction is the main part of the contract, and it informs the basis of the overall scheme estimate, which includes lots of other elements that go into a total scheme forecast. And again, you've been hearing about the financial challenges more generally. We've reported to Cabinet that inflation has been at 40-year high, CPI reaching over 10% increases earlier this year, and the construction industry has been particularly hit by inflation, meaning that we've seen it closer to an average of 17%. Some materials and particular services in that industry as well being higher than that. So this in turn then has had a significant impact on the scheme forecast outturn, which is set out in paragraph 26. Our estimate of the outturn cost then now stands at 116.1 million. And also we've taken into account in presenting this report that at this stage, Treasury guidance suggests a project that's at full business case stage, which is where this one is. You should be sort of working with a plus or minus of 10%. So I think we're not in the realms of talking about the minus 10% in the current climate. So at plus 10%, the scheme could outturn as high as 127.7 million. I just want to highlight to members at this stage that officers from numerous disciplines, so not just highways engineers, and we've had finance colleagues, we've had risk managers, and we've had external consultants review that cost to make sure, for instance, that it's representative of the market value for that money, and taken place in using this figure to present to you today. This clearly has then significant financial implications for the council in deciding whether to progress now with a scheme and through to delivery. Just before I move on to those options we've got in delivery, just to summarise the scheme funding, and this again is set out in the report, we have 49.5 million subject to final confirmation from DfT, 4 million from the LEP, the Local Enterprise Partnership, 14 million of developer funding. Although some existing arrangements have been signed, those are index linked, so the value of those will rise over time, but clearly not to the level of the gap that we're seeing. We've got some income from land associated with the scheme, but the remaining funding at present would need to be found by the County Council, meaning the requirement for LCC has increased from an estimated 23 million in 2021 to now 51 million. As set out in the resources section, the borrowing to cover that full contribution, including any potential contingency, would cost in the region of 4 million a year for 40 years, and that's something that we can pick up on. And clearly, inflation is not just hitting the capital programme; this is hitting other areas of the council, and we'll put this financial information in the context of the wider pressures on the council as we move through. So just taking you through then into the options as they're set out in the report. Option 1 is to progress the delivery of the scheme. Option 2 is to withdraw from it, and option 3 was looking at whether we could pause it. So we've tried as much as we can to set out the pros and cons of each option in the report, and you'll see some of that is a new situation for the County Council, so we have tried to take into account as wider assessment of that as possible and present that to you. So option 1 has the anticipated benefits associated with the scheme. So those are 4,500 houses delivered in Melton, supporting a planned growth strategy as opposed to speculative growth, reduces congestion, barriers to active travel within the town, supports an economic growth in there, as well as other things like reducing HGV movements through the town and therefore improving air quality. And that's what we've tested through the business case development as well, and that's been examined by DfT and also externally as well. So as we've said, delivery of the local of that scheme means Melton Borough Council's local plan remains relevant. The mitigation of homes that have already been granted permission, and there are around 1,700 in Melton based on this strategy, that mitigation will be delivered, makes use of that external investment and maintains our track record for delivery, which will be helpful in securing external funding in the future. It also directly support the delivery of a new primary school, as well as reflecting the significant investment the council has made over a number of years. Clearly, the disbenefit of that is the potential cost implication for us, with an additional 33 million capital investment required over and above that we've currently identified for. And that includes the portfolio risk we spoke about, the Treasury's guidance on potential cost variation, the additional contribution we've got to make, and the 12.7 million that we've spent to date. I think there is a further risk that has to be acknowledged, that because the scheme isn't in delivery yet, we've still got to do that. There are potential cost changes. We have, as officers, done and the steps are set out in the report, as much as we can to try and mitigate against this. We've got a quantified risk register. We've had independent reviews. We've taken some early work to mitigate future risk, tested ground conditions, that type of thing. But I think what we're seeing at the moment is that's certainly in the last 2 years would tell us that you can't say for certain where we'll be. So we've put that risk into the report as well. There'll also be the potential future impact on other capital schemes. Clearly, support for this scheme will impact our ability to support future schemes should they indeed increase in costs in the same way. So what might be sort of more of a surprise to people in terms of option 2 is that there are costs associated with withdrawing from the scheme as well as delivering it. And so when you look at the benefits of the option we've put out, there is a 4 million, it's £4 million cheaper for us to do this option than the option 1, and it would reduce the cost of borrowing by £0.3 million a year. That is not insignificant given the financial situation that's been set out to us, but perhaps isn't as significant as people might expect. And I'll come on to some of the reasons for that. Just a final benefit, though, to highlight of option 2 is that it obviously would potentially improve the likelihood of supporting future capital schemes, or leave that more open. So there are significant benefits associated with option 2, which is withdrawing from the scheme, and those are set out in paragraph 55 of the report. And I'll try and summarise them for you. There are some complex issues in there, including significant strategic planning implications. So at the moment, Melton's local plan is based on that strategy. It will become immediately out of date, require a new local plan. That's costly and time consuming in itself, but will present immediate 5-year land supply issues. This would in turn have an impact on developing plans across the housing market area, where we've recently agreed a statement of common ground in the housing market area to deal with the city's unmet need, and apportionment of that across the planning authorities within the county. That will clearly be undermined. And I'm sure you're familiar with this in terms of dialogue with your residents, that where strategic plans are undermined or not in place, there is a greater risk of speculative development leading to pressure on services, particularly for our purposes, roads and education. So again, then more locally in Melton Borough itself, there has already been housing agreed, and that would potentially be brought forward without the necessary infrastructure to support it, and this would have impact on the community. We would have to provide some alternative minimum mitigation, and we've sort of estimated at the moment that could cost £10 million. We've already secured contributions to the Melton Mowbray Transport Strategy, but it would likely mean that these would have to be returned and couldn't be used against those because we've changed the nature of that strategy. It'd also be really difficult for us to secure contributions from new development coming forward, because we wouldn't have that evidence base of its cumulative effect on the road and education system. And for the same reasons, it would be very difficult to revise, refusal or defend appeals for speculative development as well. More detail on those is set out in the report. There are also wider impacts, such as the fact that the council will now own the land to deliver the scheme, but it will not have the same value. We won't be able to recover the value of the land. And there's also reputational issues, in terms of that impact for residents on Melton. We've been working with them on delivering the scheme for a long time, developers and other stakeholders as well, and it may be difficult to kind of convince people to work with us collaboratively on infrastructure in the future. I think as well, it's worth highlighting that to withdraw from the scheme, we'd need to give serious consideration to the delivery of the Melton Mowbray Distributor Road South, which is another part of the strategy, and our approach to education in the area. So we'd have to review those as well and look at what impact that would have. I think just on this option as well, it'd be worth noting that the likely total sunk cost of the projects, which we wouldn't be able to recover, would be in the region of 14 million, because it would take some quite hefty work to close the scheme down as well. So, and apologies, Chair, I know it's a long introduction, but just to summarise option 3 as well, setting out the implications for pausing the scheme. You may, and I think quite rightly, ask, well, can we just wait a bit, see if we can get some more contributions? Is there a way we can do that? I think there is the potential benefit of seeking additional funding with a pause. However, I think what we've seen, particularly over the last 2 years, is that the increasing cost may mean that any additional funding you did seek would be very quickly offset, and you'd find yourself kind of chasing your tail. And I think, from my perspective, that would be a concern, particularly as there's no guarantee that we would find additional funding. And I think certainly then, given that you're talking about pausing for an unknown period of time, you're likely to realise those strategic and local planning risks that we spoke about previously under option 2. And you're also potentially putting at risk the DFT funding, because again, they like to stick to a programme and know that that's going to be delivered. So in terms, and just to mention as well, of course, it's a complex team assembled to manage a scheme like this, and so the kind of knowledge and skill set is quite difficult to put a scheme down and then restart it again, say in a couple of years. You tend to end up, people will want to recheck work that's already been done for their own liability, so it tends to cost you more in that way as well. So the resource implications of these options are set out, summarised together in paragraphs 41 to 48. And I will shortly just hand over to Declan in case there's anything else he wants to add. But I think just in conclusion, I think this is sort of representative of the difficult decisions that the county is facing. We're not alone in seeing this type of increase on schemes around the country. But I think we're potentially in a stronger position with this scheme, given its strategic case, the evidence base, and that we are ready to deliver. But clearly, in the conclusion of the report, there are implications for either delivering or withdrawing. And again, welcome your views on that as we move into that decision. So thank you for bearing with me, Chair, and I'll hand over to Declan.
Just give a very brief sort of financial overview. Basically, if it was to summarise the report financially, you just basically say there's no good options. The report set it out to say all options are unaffordable. If we proceed, it's going to cost us an awful lot of money, and we're bearing all the construction risks. If we stop, we don't save a huge amount of money, but we still need to deal with the housing somehow. And if we pause, it simply just makes the situation worse. So members will be aware that funding the existing capital programme already required borrowing, and the additional funding requirement will add over £2 million per annum to our cost base. And this is going to worsen an already difficult financial position, requiring more savings to be delivered by the organisation. And it goes without saying, it's really important we do keep pursuing additional funding to reduce the impact on the council as far as possible.
Anyone else at the front wish to make any comments? I thought on this one we could go round to each individual member in turn and just see what the consensus of opinion was, if there is one. If I start with Mr. Merry, because I think you're on the Transport and Highways Committee.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be as brief as possible. I've worked with planning at North West Leicester for over several years now, and we're always struggling to get it right, infrastructure before development. And I think this is a great example of getting the infrastructure in before the development. I class this as a project, and it scored 2 to 3.1 on the BCR scale, which is high value for money. And the Link Road project to me is like a domino. If it doesn't go ahead and the domino falls, it's got knock-on effects, and you've covered some of them in your report. But 7 years of time, effort and resources and cost gone. We won't recover that. Improved air quality in the town centre, Melton, gone. It won't be improved. Potential 4,500 houses, 30 hectares of employment land and all the 106 monies that come with it. That's gone. New primary school, gone. The Melton local plan, in my opinion, would fail. You've already mentioned that. And last but not least, the statement of common ground, which has been worked on for quite some time now to meet Leicester's city's unmet housing needs, is all but finalised, and it's all been dished out, and we've all taken some pain. That will fail, okay, and it's going to have a bigger knock-on effect in that all of the local plans would then potentially fail. Any that's in front of the inspectors would possibly be sent back, etc., etc. So it's a difficult one because we're skint. We've got no money. But in my opinion, I definitely think that this should go ahead. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Merry. Mr. Gillard.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I agree a lot with what Keith's just said. I think we've got no choice. It's an absolutely fantastic scheme which will not only benefit Melton, but Leicestershire as a whole as well. So I've ruled out clearly option 2 and 3. I want to support option 1, which we did last Thursday. And I think the overwhelming view of the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee was to support option 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gillard. Mr. Gatoya.
And I would stick with their decision.
Mr. Richardson.
Really, we've got no option. I think option 1's the only game in town for the reasons mentioned. Yeah, we have to consider as the Highways Authority the impact on this council of local plans falling over at district level, which I think would be catastrophic to us. It would incur us in far more costs than the additional costs here. And we shouldn't miss sight of the fact that you're talking about 4,500 houses here. Even if it's a 20-year build, in 20 years' time, you're going to be receiving an extra £9 million a year. So to offset the cost of borrowing, I appreciate we've got an upfront cost we need to meet. So perhaps we need to be more creative in how we borrow the money, with perhaps some bullet element going forward. But the houses themselves will generate the issue. Now, because of the type of houses, the type of residents, their cost needs from the county council are probably likely to be low, because they're probably going to be younger families, smaller children, probably not the impact on adults communities that you might otherwise see. The difference between the two is only 300,000. I say only 300,000 blithely. But there is absolutely no option but to do this to retain our credibility. And if nothing else, we've got agenda item 12 coming forward, where we're looking at our carbon neutral plan for 2045. Well, that disappears straight away if we say no to this. So, you know, it's all interlinked, and these things have to go in the chain. And I think we've got to do it. And I think we've got to show the government that we're credible people in being able to take money off them for these schemes and deliver these schemes. And if we don't deliver these schemes, Leicestershire will be the worse for it.
Mrs. Fryer.
I think the previous speakers mainly said what I would cover, but as the member for an adjoining council, we would be terribly affected if this did not go forward. All the districts have worked their socks off with the common gain and have worked for years. The reputation of this council, bearing in mind how many years this has been discussed, well, it's just, we're not worth it for a lot of people. So yes, this scheme has got to go ahead and as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mrs. Fryer. Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. So I mean, I think probably the big surprise for me, not being on the Transport Committee, is the first time that I've had the paper, is seeing the difference between options 1 and 2. And I have to say, I had always assumed that actually, you know, the benefit of actually not going ahead was actually the full £4 million per year. To realise that it's 300,000 puts the two options very much sort of side by side, and then you have to actually measure all of the other implications of option 2, of reputation, of risk to other areas of housing that otherwise would have been constructed. There is also the potential, I guess, of third parties possibly taking action against the county council on only having pushed ahead on the basis that this was going ahead, and therefore sort of foregone profits, etc., that they may consider. So the implications are clearly all over the place, but also extremely significant. So I have to say, on the basis of seeing the difference between option 1 and 2 of being 300,000 rather than the 4 million, I think the options are actually very, very limited, and option 1, given everything that everyone's just said, seems to be the logical conclusion. But we are obviously in a difficult position regardless, and that is not a comfortable position to be in.
Yeah, Mr. Morgan. Mrs. Page.
Thank you. Strategically, I have to agree with everything the previous speakers have said, and I think we haven't got an option. However, Personally, I think it is very sad that we are in this position and that we have to incur our residents an extra bill of over 50 million. In particular, when all of us as district have got air quality issues, probably need a bypass, which is relating. So unfortunately, you know, despite that and looking at it, I do have to agree. However, I have to ask a question. I can't just let you sit there. So my first question is, have we approached the DFT, has Melton to work with the MPs to try to get some more government funding? With this plan, with this delivery, there then should come a master plan which Melton would have to produce. So is there any way within that master plan we could see whether there could be some more financial contribution via either developers going forward, because that road will open more opportunity for further development, which then, you know, in the future has to be negotiated via infrastructure policies in the local plan. And I think that is very important, that Melton can make a contribution via the developers. What is Melton's stance of the, and I am fully aware that a district authority is not liable or responsible of providing infrastructure, and that this is a question that should not probably be asked, but just for openness and transparency, I will ask it anyway. Has Melton been approached of in any way of making any contributions?
If I start with this one, and then whether Nick wants to talk about Melton and the MPs, but I'll kind of kick off. So in terms of the DFT, we have had a telephone conversation with the DFT, and their stance on a kind of officer to officer basis is, well, that's the conditions of the scheme. You know, it's gone over budget. It's over to you, county council. You're going to have to fund it. And I know from talking to other treasurers up and down the country that is the stance they're taking with all the major schemes at the moment. So we've asked the question from an officer perspective, and we've got the answer back, which is there's no extra funding. Nick, do you want to talk about MPs and Melton?
Sure. Sure. So on additional funding, I have had meetings online, myself and Deborah, with Alicia only the other week. Alicia has approached the Chancellor on funding and is lobbying the DFT on additional funding. But at the moment, I have no news to tell you about whether we're not getting any extra funding. There might, it is a might, be a little bit of slack with the DFT because this money came from the something majors, large local majors. All the other ones that got money, like when Sir Alan got us this 50 million, a lot of others got slugs of money, and they're all suffering from the same amount of inflation before the pandemic and before the recession, which we're almost certainly in now. So some may slip in time. So there could be some slack in that pot. I don't, in all honesty, think the government have any more money to be giving to schemes in the round, but there may turn out to be some money in that pot. And obviously we will continue to pursue it. It could be worth writing to Melton Mowbray to ask if they could come up with some more money. They are giving some, but you have to remember Melton Mowbray is the smallest council in Leicestershire. You know, Oby Wigston's big compared to Melton, so they haven't got a great deal of slack in their system. But it would certainly be useful if this committee resolved to ask the Cabinet, when we make the decision soon on this, whether or not we should ask Melton for some more money. I mean, if I'm honest, the answer is almost certainly going to be no, but we need to protect our own resources and show that we have tried. Can I just carry on, Chairman? I know you've not taken these guys over here, but can I thank Jana and in particular Jana for the amount of work she's done on this. It has been particularly tortuous and very, very hard work. Obviously, Jana has a team with her, but Jana's led it. And of course, we mustn't forget, I'm not going to thank Chris for his work because he's almost given it to somebody else, but there has been a lot of work done in Chris's department on these numbers, and they have been a real problem because they've been such a moving feast. So to summarise, I agree with the six that have spoken and yourself that there is nowhere else to go except to bite the bullet and fund the scheme. Unfortunately, we're going to have to do it. The numbers show that we should do it. There is no downside to doing it. If you read Jana's report, everything about the scheme has positive benefits. The only disbenefit we have is that we've got to put it onto the council tax, given time. Don't draw the money down, don't borrow our bit to start with, but we'll have to borrow it in the longer term. So that will be added to everybody's council tax bill when there's probably only, 60-odd thousand residents of Melton Mowbray who on the face of it benefit, but we'll all benefit when we try and go round Melton rather than crawl through the middle. So we've got to remember that. And then also we have to remember that future schemes, and obviously Jonathan's not here as the leader of Charnwood today, but there'll be some big financial consequences of his local plan because, he's 3 and a bit times the size of Melton. So any future capital schemes, we will not, on the face of it, be able to fund up front. We'll have to rely on money coming in from developers to build out the schemes. So I would recommend to you that you resolve to support the scheme, recognise it's costly, recognise that we might have to make some savings in our budget in future years, and recognise that future schemes, I think the forward funding future schemes, it places, let's say, very serious doubt on them without more government money for these schemes. And as you know, well, you don't know, Chairman, but Rosita knows, we are going to discuss it as a matter of principle at a Conservative group meeting as the administration next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader, and may I join your thanks to the team. But can Jana just come back on my master plan question? And to finish up is, yes, I do recognise that it may be put onto the council tax, but I still think that is a big ask for every resident in the Shire. Maybe we should look at alternative methods, as I said at the previous report, and maybe getting rid of some of the assets that don't realise as a great income. But Jana, can you please reply on that? Thank you.
No problem. So just to build on a couple of bits we've been doing, as Chris said, at very much a Leicestershire focus level, we've been working with the MP and into DFT, but also Anne in particular does a lot of good work with Adept Association, so place-based services really, and to actually get other authorities to share some of the challenges that they're facing collectively into government as well, because I think as the leader mentioned, there is a bit of, I don't know if it's infrastructure chicken, but where people are waiting for somebody not to deliver their scheme for the opportunity to borrow a bit of money, when what we're saying is collectively, the cost pressures across that programme need addressing with DFT. So as I said, no news on that, but that is work ongoing and we are doing that. In relation to developers, there is quite a bit we can do actually and have set up. So Melton, with the work that we've done together previously, have got a master plan for both the north and south sustainable neighbourhoods in the area, and they have already got a kind of strategic approach to contributions that prioritises highways and education infrastructure. The bit that we're working on and is a national problem in terms of, as you mentioned,
developers can't necessarily bring forward major schemes on their own. We bring them forward and collect contributions later. The gap between the value of those schemes, the value of the contributions been growing. So we're working with colleagues, particularly in finance and the growth service, and there'll be a report coming which will enable us to set out our cost of infrastructure in a public facing way, update those contributions regularly. So the cost that goes into the 106 will be the current one at that time, and we will also link inflation costs to their costs at the time it's set. At the moment, the system means that the inflation gets, or indexation happens when the Section 106 is signed, and I'm sure you've all got examples in your area where it would take a surprisingly long time to sign a 106 and they become out of date. So we're looking to address that. What that means in practice then is that we can ask for a higher amount than we have been doing from the developers in Melton, not for ones that are already signed. I think that's unlikely, but going forward, what it means overall will be dependent on their viability. So each individual application will get assessed for viability. They're not all going to be able to put £20,000 per house into road infrastructure, but we will get more. And for instance, for the applications in the system, and then the ones in the future, you could still be talking at just another £1,000 a house, 2.8 million. So it is something that is worth doing, and we will absolutely do. And I think fair to say that Melton officers are ready to support us where that's possible as well. Sorry, I'm probably slaying slightly on, but again, just at that point I mentioned, my team have been working closely with Charnwood officers on the local plan, and again that challenge for future infrastructure has been acknowledged, and we've developed a strategy to support that plan that isn't dependent on that big upfront cost, in order to make sure that development's not stalled, but that challenge isn't there. So, and that approach will be rolling out and working with colleagues around the country. Hopefully not the country. We've got enough on in the county. As well, just sort of learning those lessons and recognising those risks. So hopefully that kind of covers off that question.
Thank you, Janet. Mr. Gold.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, I don't think we've got any choice. I think we've got to go with it and complete the scheme, reputational as much as financial. It does mark a change though, doesn't it? Because traditionally, it's ironic that the previous lead member for finance was so much against prudential borrowing, and now that's what we're going to have to do to deliver this scheme, and he was from Melton. So I think we've got to have a good hard look at the issue of borrowing, as Nick has said, because those demands elsewhere in the county, they're not going to go away. You've mentioned Charnwood. All the districts have got to get a local plan over the line. They're all going to have growth. They're all going to have significant infrastructure. We're not going to sit here and put the begging bowl out today because we've got to resolve this one. But I don't think it's sustainable to say we can't do any more big schemes. We've got to we've got to address that issue. I don't know what the answers are, and I don't envy anyone trying to get to grips with it. My only other comment about this, I just did a quick number crunching, and I suppose in the end of the day, it's what we can get out of them. But 4,500 houses, 14 million, works out just over £3,000 a house. Now, of course, you might say, well, they argued that the road wasn't a benefit to all the houses. But looking at the map, that's what it's going to deliver. That, I don't know, just some comment really. Is that a good outcome? That 3,000 per developer per house from the developers for 106? Is that an average? Have we done better elsewhere? Appreciate we can't undo the 106s that we've got, but going forward, clearly we need to adopt, I'm sure officers do anyway, but adopt an even more harder line with the developers in saying, look, you need to help us fund this. Check.
Simon. Joanna, did you want to come back?
Yeah, apologies. So again, in terms of that 4,500 and the 3,000 a house, we're generally at the moment securing around 8.6 a house from Melton, and that's because at the moment, and again, we will revisit this prioritisation as part of the work we're doing with Melton. There's the north and the south road, and depending where you are within that, we've got a nominal split of contributions towards the strategy. Clearly, part of what we'll be doing going forward is prioritising those contributions towards this phase of the strategy before we do anything else. And actually, we do something similar in Northwest, where we're prioritising the development of the A511 as the first port of call. It is it's difficult because I will not claim in any way to understand the dark arts behind housing values, profits, landowner demand. But we do get higher in Melton than we do elsewhere in the county, and I think we can potentially look at that, as we've just mentioned. What I think is interesting is when we do local plans, we tend to set that based on a county a district-wide viability assessment, and then we move forward from there. And I think what we're talking about now is introducing more regular and more robust assessment at the plan development level. And it perhaps may be the case that some developers contribute 8,000 a house, some contribute 10. We've always done it at a flat amount before because it's easier to avoid challenge. But working with legal colleagues as well recently, and some, and I say the detail will come forward, but as long as we can evidence those costs and then test the viability, I think we can do more than what we've traditionally done. So I hope that helps to answer the question.
You, Mrs. Hack.
Thank you. I mean, I think lots of contributions already with regards to being in a situation where we have no choice but to go forward for it. Actually, I think that's a really difficult position for an authority to be in, is that the scheme has developed in such a way that the cost of withdrawing from it is almost as much as just going ahead. And I suppose my question is, did we know that the amount at risk was the value that has actually been presented in the paper today, and how does that come to us as councillors in previous papers? I think the real difficulty all of us will have, I think, is that the authority is in a really difficult position financially, and any penny that we borrow is a penny we have to save elsewhere. And of course, Terry's right, we will get some enhanced in terms of number of properties, and therefore council tax, blah blah blah, that comes in. But all of these decisions don't operate independently of one another. And I suppose that's my concern, is actually, what do we not have to do because we have to do this? And those are the the real difficult questions financially. I think from a development point of view, it's, we're in a no-win. We have to do it. And I think the people of Melton have waited a really long time. So my question is, they have waited an awful long time for this, and the delay after delay and after delay has a contribution to make to actually how much it's now going to cost. So how much is that cost increase has been because we're so overdue with delivery, and what could we do to prevent that in the future?
So I think it's a really fair question in terms of delay, and it won't surprise you to know that I'm going to sort of try and defend that position a little bit first and explain it. So I think you're right. So when we submitted the bid, I think we're effectively 2 and a bit years over where we thought we would be from 2016 to 2018 time. And it probably, again, won't surprise you to know that the number of processes involved in those type of schemes, so the planning application, the public inquiry over the CPO, that you pick up sort of 3 to 6 month delays in those, and there you are, you where we are now. So there, and again, I will say this to you, and we can look at some other examples, but other schemes that came through that large local majors at similar time, there is one ahead of us, but it didn't have the same land acquisition challenges. We're actually ahead of others, so and by some quite significant time. I think that is a systemic problem. I'm going to say this to you now, I would do, but I genuinely believe it is, because the way that the incentive to bid for funding works is we put something in at quite an early stage, and then we take all the risk on that. And also, maybe if there's elections or other things in that timetable, there tends to be deadlines that are encouraged on those, which we're all challenged to meet. And actually, when you then go for a public consultation on planning, or you've got that, those delays then add up. And so they do there. I think being really honest about it, this delay, if we were to be on site with this scheme 2 years ago, it would have been considerably cheaper. And I think that is fair to say that the events of the last 2 years have clearly had a significant impact on that. I don't think that any of us could have anticipated that kind of cost then. So your question about did we know, I think that particularly this 2 year delay, no, because we would have been looking at maybe something like the levels of inflation we were looking at before, perhaps 10 million overall increase rather than this. And so I think, and I know the word unprecedented is so overused in this, but it has been that we've had similar delays on schemes before. We've not seen those same impacts. I think in terms of your question about how do we not do it again, and I promise you some sleep has been lost over that question, and particularly again in terms of maintaining this position by the team. So I think there is a few things, and again starting at a high level. One is, do we continue to engage in the government's process as it's set out? We now have felt those risks of the way it is. Do we put in further bids, for instance? Do we limit our bidding? Do we do it in a different way? So what we've set out in terms of Charnwood's local plan and that sort of planned approach to bringing development forward, I think is something that we certainly can do in the short term. I think the other thing is, if I was really honest with you, I don't think it's a delay. I think it was probably a more realistic estimate of what the scheme delivery timetable should have been. And I think we need to hold that line more when we're putting in bids in the future as well. And I think the evidence of this will help us to do that. That said, I went back over, in preparation for today, where those delays in programme occurred to us, and they are in those processes that are slightly outside of your control, that you're not fully in control of. And so again, I think that contingency should apply to programme as well as time. And we've been working with our colleagues in finance as well as some external organisations to try and make sure that we've not, they call it optimism bias in construction contracts, because our engineers and us are always naturally optimistic. We can do this, we can do that. Planning consultations, only 16 weeks, we'll manage it, and to learn those lessons. And I think that, again, there's a collective national movement to do that as well. So I hope that it's probably not ideal in terms of the answer, but hopefully does provide one.
Just one brief word, Chairman, if you allow me, on the delay. So obviously COVID was a massive problem, but also we have to remember we live in a democracy. We're not China, so you can't announce you're going to build a road today and you start in a couple of 3 months. It is tortuous, some of the processes that we have to go through because we live in a democracy. On the bidding question, I'm constantly moaning to members of Parliament about it, and when Neil was in the correct department, I mean, he's in a different one now, he recognised that the bidding process is really, really bad for councils, because you have to bid and then you have to do all the work and stuff before they actually even say, yes, you've got the money. So it's very, very expensive for us. And he also admits there's too many, this is Neil's word, too many penny pots. So, they don't give us the money. So Chris was saying, we've got this budget coming up, and we're waiting for the Chancellor, then we're waiting for local government settlement. Then when we get it, we're still not a lot better off, because there's so many stuff that comes through grants which follow afterwards, and bidding for things. It's really, really hard to run a county council that's tight for money when there's bidding and penny pots and grants being given willy-nilly, and often with political bias sometimes, in my view, where we don't benefit. But we are where we are, and I still recommend that we would proceed with this, even with the downsides has been outlined of the costs, because the upside that's been said by everyone here far outweighs the downside. And if we let Melton down now, that I don't think they'll ever forgive us.
Mr. Ashton, Mr. Barclay.
Yeah, I think members have outlined clearly the economic benefits, not just to Melton, but to the whole of Leicestershire. It's going to cost us about 125 million. That's even with the 10% contingency. The effects of not doing it are substantial, insofar as every local plan throughout the whole of the county will be thrown into chaos. We'll have development which isn't in accordance with any local plan, Melton will suffer really badly. I can't see any reason. I can't see any reason why we wouldn't go ahead, given the three options. I think it's been very clearly pointed out, all the points, the pros and cons, and Jan has given a really detailed explanation of what's happened and why it's happened. I don't think there's any option. I think it's got to be option one, and we've got to do it. It's common sense.
Mr. Barclay, Mr. O'Shea.
Thank you, Chairman. As lead member, I've listened to what the committee has said, and it's clear that this programme gives economic benefit to that area of the county. It gives it to across the county and to neighbouring authorities. And to me, there's only one way forward, and that is to actually go with option one. I'd like to put on thanks, my sincere, thanks and gratitude to Jana, her team, all the work that they've done. They've been on this for years just to deliver this project. And in all honesty, the work that they've put in has been tremendous. We've got first-rate officers here that have actually delivered. It's not their fault that the economic situation is developed across the country, but they've mastered this and done the best that they can. And that also goes with the finance department. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Bracken.
Yeah, I was just to say, I think my predecessor probably wouldn't want to have borrowed, but I think with his passion for his home borough, he would have definitely been supporting this, and he would have accepted the changes in circumstances that were in place probably 7 years ago when the report says it cost us 14 million to date. So I think it's the only way to go. It's needed.
Thank you, and thank you to all the members of the Commission for giving your views on this issue. I think the consensus of opinion is obviously that we are in favour of option one, that the situation is not as ideal as we would have hoped, but that there really is the least unpalatable option to take is option one. So that's the general view. Mr. Gillard, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, just for clarity, Chairman, are we recommending Rosita's comment about writing to Melton, asking the Cabinet to write to Melton Borough Council for some kind of contribution?
Thank you. To repeat, I know it is not district authorities' remit to provide infrastructure, but as the leader said, they're most likely going to say no. But I think for transparency and for when we're having to justify an increase in the council tax, that we can say we left no stone unturned and that we have tried that avenue as well. And I've just put it forward, and I hope I have a seconder to do so.
Okay, is everyone in favour of that? Yep. Okay. No. Okay, let's have a vote. Or you want to come back in?
If I could just say, we've got to be mindful of the fact we are a county council. We have our responsibilities. District councils have their responsibilities. If we start blurring the responsibilities between the two, where does it end? We'll be getting letters from district council saying, "Can you do A, B, and C for us?" And what moral ground would we have to then refuse to look at their requests if we do it the other way around? We are the Highways Authority. It is our duty. If in discussions between this council and the council involved, they seek to have a different accommodation, that is entirely up to them. But as a matter of principle, that should be where it lays. Now, we're already aware from what's been said that Melton have already made an offer and are contributing. So I think to go back to them again is just flying in the face of common sense.
But if I may come back, it is also that every council taxpayer within the whole of Leicestershire is going to want a justification. And we have got every justification, and this, in my opinion, is the only gap, unless we reflect that Melton has already been. But it is up to everybody else. I put a proposal forward. Councillor Gillard seconded it, and so maybe we'll vote on it.
I just have to say through you, Chair, that we're opening a whole can of worms. if we start writing to district councils who are already heavily involved, who are already in other ways putting money into this, not necessarily giving us £2 million or whatever it is, but through their own work for this. Are we then going to, if Harborough want to do something, oh, by the way, you've got to put some more money in? I'm sorry, I cannot support this motion. I leave it to our officers and the leaders of various councils to discuss with them and do the best possible thing. We're already involving MPs, district councillors, leaders and senior officers.
You want to withdraw that in the case then?
No, I'm not withdrawing. I want to vote and I want officers' opinion and the leaders' opinion on that. Okay, then we'll have a vote because I've got a seconder.
Right, thank you everyone for your contribution on that. Does anyone at the front want to make any other final comments? No? Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you Jana and Mr O'Shea and Chris and Mr Brecken and Mr Rushton and Declan for taking all those questions and presenting. So next item is item 12, East Midlands Shared Service Annual Performance Update. So we've got Declan Keegan for this item as well. Lucy Littlefair is here, hello. And I think also Mr Brecken is remaining for the item as well. Okay.
Yeah, sorry to bother you. Oh,
Yes,
are we
Mr.
just continuing on and going to have lunch when we finished, or?
I think the hope was we'd carry on,
Yeah, okay.
because these next two items I expect to be a bit. Well, the items will take as long as members want to contribute to them, so we'll carry on with item 12 and hand over to Declan.
I think if I may, Chair, I think on a serious point, we've already left several members of the committee. We cannot continue to have meetings that last this length of time with this number of agenda items. I've raised this so many times in the past. If we have to have more Scrutiny Commission meetings, so be it. But you cannot expect people to sit here and concentrate and contribute properly for several hours at a time. This needs to be planned better than it is. No meeting should last more than 3 hours, which is the rule for a council meeting without a vote. And we've really got to look seriously about this, because the danger is we then end up with reports which we skim through, which is disrespect to the officers who's produced and disrespect to this council in the way we've done it. And we've got to have a better schedule than this. I mean, you know, we're at the stage where most of our laptops are about to blow up because we've got no power that we can plug into on the desks. And you know, this is becoming, you know, slightly farcical, if you don't mind me saying so. So, you know, we've lost 3 already. I mean, you know, where does it end?
We can certainly review things in future and see to have shorter meetings. And if necessary, if members do wish to have additional meetings, if members do want to have additional meetings, then we can certainly be flexible in having additional meetings so that they are therefore shorter but more frequent. We're still forward.
I'll let Lucy do the sort of the main introduction. I'll just say a couple of words at the end.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so this report details the performance of East Midlands Shared Services for the financial year 2021-2022. Paper sets out the background to the service and the partnership arrangements that Leicestershire have with Nottingham City Council. You'll see paragraphs 9 to 15 detail my overview of the year, which is an accurate appraisal of some of the difficulties experienced, particularly in the payroll service, but at the same time highlighting successes across the shared service and my confidence in stabilising the payroll service within the next 12 months. The report covers in more detail the operational, customer, people and audit performance. And finally, I've included information about our priorities this year with an accompanying key which confirms the benefits we want to achieve in each project. Happy to take any questions after Declan's added.
I just really wanted to acknowledge sort of the work that Lucy and her team does, and it's sort of really good work, because implementing a major system is never easy, but EMS have had to do it for 2 organisations simultaneously through a global pandemic that necessitated everybody suddenly having to work from home, and then back into the sort of most difficult recruitment sort of environment most of us can remember. So the vast majority of EMS, what they do is done well and very well. But we inevitably sort of focus on the things that don't go so well, which tends to be sort of the, it's the minor things, and it's right that we do focus on them, because that's how you get things right. But I did feel sort of when you read the report, sometimes it's maybe a little bit too sort of downbeat, and big strides have been made in sort of stabilising the service to where it needs to be, and starting to put some sort of really good improvements in place as well.
Thank you, Declan and Lucy. Any members have any questions? Mr. Merry?
Thank you, Chair. I refer to paragraph 11 in the report. Thank you for the report. Very concise. And it starts off by saying suffered functionality gaps within the new system. So my question is, why were these not designed out in the development process before the system went live? And then you go on to, I've got 4 questions, I'll be as quick as I can. Then you say that when you went live, the issues for queries increased. It's only 0.2%, 286 people. How much time, effort and resources has been used to rectify all of these issues? And then the bit that really concerns me is the sentence where you say you held the system provider to account. What on earth does that mean? Did you give them a stern talking to, or have they got financial implications in the service level agreement? If we need to go private, and obviously then we'll have to take that up through you, Chair. But it continues to have an impact, but there's no mention of the timeline to fix. So what's the timeline to fix the impacts? Thank you, Chair.
Back on this question.
Okay, so a number of questions quite rightly around some statements that I've put in the report about those functionality gaps. So the nature of the system that we purchased is cloud-based, and therefore, to a certain extent, we went through an extensive procurement process. We're happy through our requirements that the responses that it was going to provide everything that we needed. But as we started our implementation, we realised that there were some functionality gaps within that. I've stated that I can't remember the language that I use, that they were held to account. I would probably need to take some actual legal advice in terms of what I can go further to say on that, but officers from both councils were involved, and both legal departments and things have been resolved satisfactorily, but in an open meeting it wouldn't be appropriate to go into that detail. How long is it taking? How much time? How much effort? Then we have a stabilisation project in place, which over the next 12 to 18 months, what we're having to do is where we had those functionality gaps, we've had to put workarounds in place, and it's now a case of backing those out of the system. So there is a cost to both councils and some additional staff that's been required during this period of time.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, did you want to come back, Mr. Merrick?
I'm not an IT expert, but 12 to 18 months seems a long time to close the gaps. I just think I'd like some more information as to what those gaps are and why it's going to take 12 to 18 months. Thank you, Chair.
Just to give an example, the system didn't have the 2 pension schemes, LGPS and teachers' pension schemes, built. So we had to build those ourselves. They are now available, so it's a case of backing out those pension schemes. And obviously, anything we do that's related to people's pay and employees' pay, we have to do very carefully with all the appropriate amount of testing. And that's just a couple of the examples. There were a number across the system.
Thank you, Chair. I think, we had a similar report about a year ago, and I think a year ago I asked what was the cost of outsourcing it to, nobody does payroll anymore apart from this. I do not, and still do not, having spent several years as a county councillor, understand why we do this, what the benefits are, what the cost benefits are. I've never seen a report that tells me the cost benefits. The costs seem to far outweigh what we would spend outsourcing it. So what I'd actually like to see is a paper that says, why we continue doing this? What benefits does it give us over and above what the commercial market could provide? And we've had a clear example there that, you know, two of our biggest things, the pension funds, if they were missed out the scope of actually setting this, it just goes to show that we didn't have the right procedures in place even to start with. And, you know, the question Mr. Merry asked, quite obviously, which I appreciate might be confidential, but if there are confidential elements, other councils, including this one, quite often send out confidential papers and you go into closed session. You can't expect councillors to read a report and then be told, well, you can't have the information to make any decisions.
So I suppose the confidential piece is not so much just about sort of the public session, it's the legal agreement between us and the other parties. So it's kind of, it does extend sort of further than that. But if there was a decision needed that did require that sort of information, we would sort of seek to sort of open that up. So obviously you're quite right to say that you'd need that information, but it's not as simple as just kind of taking it outside the public domain. It's an actual agreement, sort of a tri-party agreement, which is restricting us. I mean, in terms of the sort of the M's and whether sort of the outsourcing, it is something that kind of hovers in your back of your mind, but it's kind of, it's only periodically you can look at it. So doing the system upgrade, regardless of whether we're in-source or outsourced, we need our ERP for sort of, you know, finance, procurement, HR type activities. So that piece, whether we in-source or outsource, is there. And outsourcing isn't something you'd want to do in the middle of sort of the system change, just purely because the amount of kind of turmoil that's kind of going on that just inevitably comes with these things. And EMS to date has had a very successful trading business with sort of schools, district councils, colleges, etc., which does give a level of assurance about sort of where the cost was. But as we, you know, it's something that Lucy's constantly looking at. Is it the right thing to approach the operations as we do at the moment? And the level of activity that we do at the moment is kind of continually reduces. So a good example at the moment is they're putting a new invoice scanning in. We've had invoice scanning before, but they're now upgrading to a far more intelligent one. So it just continually reduces the amount of people. So although we don't trumpet it as a large scale outsourcing, actually bit by bit it's taking those tactical opportunities to automate or get people to do things that maybe we've done in the past. But we do find over time there's things go in circles, don't they? So sometimes we outsource a piece, get somebody to do it for us, but then a few years later, you know, our own practices change or their practices change, and it makes sense to come back in. But I can give you the assurance, it is continually looked at, and EMS does have to account to a joint committee. Sort of the lead member and his opposite member at Nottingham City sit on and go through the performance on a quarterly basis of the shared service.
Thank you.
So what is the net performance? Because I couldn't see it in this report. So what have we earned in the last 12 months out of this service vis-a-vis what would it have cost us to outsource? So what is the difference? So what is the benefit to this council in doing it compared to outsourcing it? It was agreed a year ago, or in fact 2 years ago, that we would actually look into the cost of outsourcing it. I've never had that information back. So what is the financial benefit to this council? I mean, it says in the start of the report, doesn't it, we set a target of achieving savings of 1.8 million over 10 years, I think it said. Well, how was that set? On what benchmark? On what basis? And how do we actually, as a committee, evaluate the success?
So those savings are going back to the sort of the establishment of EMS, when there was a business case there done by external consultants about what are the benefits of bringing it together. But EMS is no different to any other sort of service that we produce at the moment. We don't have a running kind of total of kind of the cost versus the outsourcing, because you've got to get, you know, apologies sort of stating the obvious, but you've got to get that sort of like with like in terms of specifications, things like that. So it's a periodic exercise that you'd look at, and then sort of, as opposed to sort of a running kind of exercise that you do on an annual basis, because you can't run a sort of service just assuming that it may get outsourced continually. The biggest one we've done recently is around sort of the cost of the system, and we did extensive benchmarking on that, and it was significant. It was far better than sort of a lot of the I think it was the best sort of that we'd seen in kind of the local government circles in terms of what we got, and that was to do with the sort of the scale that we could bring to it. So we do it tends to be tactical on a kind of on a specific thing, so you can compare like with like. But the most recent one on around the systems is that sort of we are making significant savings from it.
Right. Anybody else have any questions on this item, Mrs. Pitt?
Thank you. Yes, I hear you, But if there is a legal agreement in place which indicates that things have gone wrong, now, if things have gone wrong, the whole system to me means there was, or I'm dittoing what Councillor Richardson's saying, we then have to question, is it value for money? Should we really do it? Or should we go down a different avenue? And maybe we should bring a report to this committee to have a look at it. When I'm looking at the report, it extremely worries me that it says things like 268 members of staff were disadvantaged. Managers have juggled multiple priorities and had to juggle operational issues and whatever else. And EMS is resilience, and there's total confidence. There is an ability to restore its reputation and services. Now, I would like to know, and obviously I can't ask you what has gone wrong unless you're going to tell me, but I would like to know it is how confident going forward are you that all of the issues have been addressed, that there is a sustainable mechanism going forward to make sure it is delivering the savings and all of these mistakes that allegedly and issues that have happened cannot be happening again.
You want to come in, Mr. Bracken?
Yeah, it was just, I mean, the report says 0.2% affected 268, 99.8% weren't affected. So if you're going to focus a report on a special report back on 0.2%, I think that's a shame. I think functionality of the system, there was an expectation it would deliver, it didn't. And that was dealt with in-house by Lucy and her team to make sure that that operated. I mean, I think when you're dealing with, I presume it was Oracle-based system, when you're dealing with Oracle, which is a major system supplier across the sort of country and worldwide, I think these problems do occur, but I think 99.8% of people didn't suffer any issues, and those issues were obviously addressed and dealt with. So it's, I think that would be just probably a report that wasn't needed. I do take on board people's comments about cost of outsourcing, and that's something that, you know, we've talked about certainly at the board meetings that we have in Nottingham City Council. Nottingham City Council obviously is as an authority are in a, you know, their financials have been quite well advertised, and they are probably more stringent looking at the operational side of this and how effective it is. And we also share those views now, so that's something we do across the meetings that we have on a quarterly basis. But certainly it's, you know, I would say to have a report based on that would be when 99.8% were positively and not affected. It would just seem to be a negative report to be requesting.
So the question still remains, is it delivering, or have all of the issues been addressed and are officers happy?
All of the issues have been addressed in terms of the kind of workarounds that we need to put in place to ensure that our staff get paid accurately, yeah, and on time across the 40,000 people that we pay each month. That's just taking extra effort in the background within EMSS to be able to do until we can, as I explained, back out some of those system issues that we've got. So it's manual effort that's required to do extra checking. Yeah, in the meantime, and as I said, because of the kind of the size and the scale and the complexity of some of those, it's just going to take us between 12 and 18 months, yeah, to be able to complete it all.
And do you believe that this contract delivers value for money for the authority?
Yeah, I definitely do. I have got a really close network with other councils that are using the same supplier and the same system. We were just one of the early adopters of that system, and that's where you know, it fell short a little bit to begin with. But it's the system that's used across the majority of local government.
Okay, Mrs. Pryor.
Thank you. Taking up Mrs. Page and Mr. Brecken's points. I don't think we need a report, but 268 people were disadvantaged. And I would like to know, and I'm sure the rest of us would like to know, that those people were compensated or were helped. 268 people would not consider themselves insignificant. If I did not get a sum I was due, or it was an incorrect sum, I would hope that that would be immediately sorted out for me at no cost to myself. And therefore, I don't think we need a report, but we need reassurance that I know 99.8%, whatever it is, got their money right, but those 268 people are people, and you don't know their financial circumstances.
Yeah, apologies if it wasn't clear enough in the report, but as I said, where we got those issues for those members of staff where there was maybe an under or an overpayment, then they were rectified immediately. We're able to do same day payments. So yeah, there was no financial disadvantage.
Mr. Barclay.
Yeah, I think members seem to be concerned about the benefits of the system as compared to outsourcing, but that relates to payroll. I understand procurement, HR and various other functions are within it. From my point of view, I think the point that Mr. Merry made about before we implemented the scheme to find out that the local government pension scheme wasn't accommodated within it, something clearly went wrong there. And not to criticise, but to say if we are going to implement systems in future, we need to make sure that it actually meets what we want it to meet. And I think to stop any future problems, it not easy, but some indication of whether, I think there was 1,800,000 over 10 years was a savings anticipated. There has been a slight overspend on the service this year, but I think to just to convince members this was the right thing to do, it is the most efficient way of doing it, and really not to put ourselves in a position where we're using a system which doesn't actually fully meet our requirements. I don't need an answer. I think those are just, again, common sense things, and I think members would be very much assured if they had some indication as to what the costs were ongoing compared to outsourcing it.
Does anyone want to come back on that, Declan?
I suppose the only piece I'd say is that I suppose it's not how they couldn't do sort of pensions, it just didn't do all the technical aspects correctly. So there's sort of most of us, it's back to almost the sort of, the 99% of people, you sort of your payroll quite straightforward, but when people have kind of, I don't know, shared roles, maternity leave, sort of retrospective changes, you're just adding more and more complexity to the system, and that's where it kind of crunched up. So it's not like we bought a system and forgot about a piece of it. It's more that the kind of the technicalities that, as people have alluded, you just don't want it to sort of have a detrimental impact on sort of how it's working, that you can't get everything right. And essentially, when you get into the testing, some of these come out. That's where you have your conversation with your system providers, and that's where you put sort of a plan in place to correct the sort of the different issues.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on this. I was one of the team that was involved in dealing with the legal issues that arose out of the procurement. Ultimately, an agreement was reached with the software provider, and the terms of that agreement contain confidentiality provisions, but those confidentiality provisions do not apply to the extent to which disclosures are required to comply with governmental and parliamentary accountability obligations. So to that extent, and in this forum, I think it is reasonable for us to discuss, to give limited information in relation to what happened in this particular situation. There was a very significant procurement of software which covered a number of different modules, including payroll, HR, and human resource type software. It was procured from a very large organization following a public procurement exercise, and issues arose during that process. Demonstrations were given to Nottingham City Council and the County Council of what the system could deliver, and representations were made about what the system could deliver. In the event, a view was taken that the system, at least early versions of it, did not quite deliver upon what was understood was going to be delivered, and the parties found themselves in a dispute. Those issues, I believe, were dealt with in some detail, and following the dispute was dealt with, led by Nottingham City Council, but supported by ourselves, because they are they provide legal services to EMS, and I can only say that the issues were fairly heavily dealt with and explored, and ultimately a resolution was found. Should we say in a I have to be cautious about what I can say, because the limits on disclosure are only to the extent that they are necessary to deal with accountability obligations. Information can potentially be shared privately, but ultimately a settlement was agreed following some very extensive correspondence involving solicitors for the major corporation, quite significant upper tier solicitors, and ourselves. We had expert advice in relation to it, external consultants, and the issues were explored in some detail, and a resolution, we believe, a positive resolution was found involving a financial settlement. So I only say that just to explain that I think a concern was expressed earlier that if we bought some software, why did we not specify what our requirements were for that software? The software was effectively off-the-shelf software. It wasn't bespoke for EMS, but I think EMS had to, because previous licenses were expiring and therefore almost had to upgrade and acquire new software, then had to take from a major supplier in the marketplace, went through a procurement process, but found ultimately that should we say, there was some difference between what was expected that software would do and what it actually did. But all of those issues led to a resolution of, with the software provider. A lot of the issues were solved through software upgrades. So a lot of these issues related to earliest version of the earliest releases of the software, and a lot of these issues have been addressed over time. I don't know if that.
Thank you, Patrick. Did you want to?
Yeah. May I just come back? Because thank you for that, Patrick. That's really good to know. But as it is down to our officers who put in a lot of work and they're having to operate it, can I just extend the question again? Has all of this helped our officers, and has it been beneficial to the delivery in the long run? And are you sure that this will be a positive thing going forward?
Yeah, I'm totally convinced that it's the right the right solution for both the councils. It's what we call an ERP solution, so it's across, as Declan described, finance, procurement, HR and payroll. Yeah, and it performs very well on the finance side of things. As we said, they've just, you know, a few gaps which have just caused some difficulties on the payroll side. But yeah, absolutely. And the system looks and feels very different now than it did when we actually purchased it back in 2017 and actually implemented it, you know, a few years later. So no, I'm definitely confident that yeah, it's the right system.
Thank you, Mrs. Hack.
Thank you. I think obviously you've provided a lot of detail. I think obviously when you go out and buy a software system, the providers also sell you the earth, and actually getting, you know, your spec could be perfect and beautiful, and they go, yes, we can deliver it. And actually when you come to deliver, the data you've got might not quite fit what they were expecting. So I do appreciate that these things don't always run smoothly. I think the question I have was on the audit section, and there were various items where we had moderate or limited assurance. I just think if you could just update the committee on the work that's done since that audit and what assurance you can give to us that we're moving in the right direction on that audit.
Yeah, that's fine. So in terms of, so we had, as explained, limited assurance on payroll, yeah, and I was fully expecting that to be the outcome that we had. Accounts receivable, which is all your debt recovery, that side of things, absolutely fine in terms of the significant assurance. The accounts payable, which is why I put a little bit more detail in the report there, was largely around the kind of access that the audit team within Nottingham had into that system. And I'm fully confident that's now been resolved, and actually that'll be significant assurance. And we've done huge amounts of work around accounts payable with some really, you know, some great new innovation around the kind of invoice processing. There should be no cause for concern around that. The system admin and access controls was just while we were kind of bedding things in, as I explained, we'd got an implementation partner that was able to do some, you know, do work on that system when the actual audit was taking place. Obviously, we're no longer implementing that system, so that's no longer the case. So yeah, I'm happy that when I return here next year, that yeah, I'll have a different suite of outcomes.
Thank you to members for their questions and contributions, and to Lucy, Declan and Lee for coming to present to us and answer questions this afternoon. So now we are on to the final substantive item on the agenda, the Annual Delivery Report and Performance Compendium 2022, which starts on page 129 of your agenda pack. Tom Purnell, Assistant Chief Executive, Andy Brown, Service Development Business Partner, and Richard Wilding, Operational Support Team Leader, I think are presenting. I think Richard's on. Richard, yeah, are presenting today. So if I can hand over to Andy and Richard, go ahead with this item. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I could just say a few words in introduction, and then Richard's got 3 or 4 very quick slides just to take you through some of the headlines. As you say, members will be familiar with the annual delivery report and compendium from previous meetings and years at the council. We have sought to do it slightly differently this year to take on board and address comments that were made last year, particularly around the size of the document and having a more summarised version. So the versions you've got before you today, I think it's a quarter of the word count for the delivery plan. So it's much more summarised, and a third of the word count for the performance compendium. So we've really sought to sort of slim that down and really focus it in on county council performance and data. But hopefully we haven't lost some of the key delivery that's gone on during the year, particularly around the outcomes framework. So we're very much focused on the county council's outcomes framework and 5 key themes. So I wasn't going to go through the narrative delivery side in particular detail, just to note that there is a lot of really good work that's gone on to deliver those outcomes this year. New outcome boards have been set up with lead officers that are really trying to focus the delivery of the county council services and departments on those outcomes, so we can really maximise outputs and activity and impact for residents. So a lot of good work that's gone on around that. In terms of the performance compendium side itself, it's got a number of components to it.
I know there's some discussion earlier on about the fair funding campaign, so you'll see there's a section around the core spending power charts and the league tables for local authorities. And sorry to say that Leicestershire is still third bottom in terms of its funding, and also in terms of the relative differentials between authorities. It's quite markedly different from authorities, particularly the London authorities at the top, but also some of the other county authorities. I think Richard will be referring to Wiltshire and Oxfordshire being top for performance in 2021, and it looks like the gap, Leicestershire gets 50 million less than Wiltshire and 80 million less than Oxfordshire, just in terms of the size of some of those spending power issues. The document also contains the 2021 benchmarking, which Richard will highlight in a moment, and also the figures that we've got for 21-22. And clearly it's been a challenging time for communities and services with the lockdowns and the wave of COVID, and that's really impacted in terms of the data we've had and what's measured. I mean, you can really see the difference between the years, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, and it's been quite challenging to establish the kind of the firm trends and position. But we're now starting to see some of that emerging, some of those pressures and some of those performance issues in the data. So I'll just hand over to Richard just to pull out a few points from the slides.
Thanks, Andy. This first slide shows our performance position compared to other counties over the last 10 years. You'll see on it from 2012-13, our relative position compared to other counties declined somewhat. I think this is related to us having to make earlier service changes due to our low funding position. We've since recovered that position, partly I think as others have had to make service cuts along the way, which has helped our relative performance position to improve. So we've got here, we're ranked third overall out of other county councils, behind two other authorities, which the next slide shows in a little bit more detail. This slide, some people may recall from previous years, brings in net spend per head. So across the horizontal axis, it shows spend per head, with low spending authorities on the right and high spending authorities on the left. On the vertical axis, we've got performance, with high performance towards the top and low performance towards the bottom. And this aggregates a raft of performance indicators that we use to track our performance all together onto one slide. It shows us in third position in terms of performance, behind Unitary, Wiltshire and Oxfordshire County Council, which are two, I think, quite well-funded counties in relatively prosperous areas. The blue dots on there are county unitary authorities. Historically, we've been the lowest spending of the counties. We were actually second lowest spending in 2021, which this slide relates to, behind just Staffordshire in that year. The next slide summarises performance across a range of service themes, again relative to other areas. So on here, the first column shows performance rank, areas of particular strength, transport and highways ranked second out of 33 areas, children's social care ranked fourth, areas of lower performance, adult social care comes out 26th, environment and waste 22nd. I think the former, adult social care, we've traditionally not done so well on quality of life and satisfaction survey measures, but we do very well on the sort of core process and efficiency measures for that service. In terms of environment and waste, new waste strategy coming on stream, and we are starting to see some improvements in the percentage of waste being landfilled and other measures in that area. The final slide here shows the change in terms of performance indicators for the most recent year, 21-22, in the darkest blue. As you get lighter, it goes back in time. So you'll be able to see from here, 45% of indicators last year improved compared to the year before. However, 36 did deteriorate. And I think just a brief comment about those, really quite a tricky year to interpret the data. COVID has been a factor in quite a number of changes in indicator positions. I think it's fair to say that quite a few indicators that benefited and improved last year, from things like lower traffic levels, fewer people coming out of hospital, lower crime, have had something of a sort of return to normality in 21-22, which is the year that's just ended. So, for example, more traffic on the road, I think, has been a factor in there being more road casualties and lower satisfaction ratings in the Highways and Transport Survey. We've had a rise in some areas of crime. We've had more people coming out of hospital and needing to be sort of accommodated and re-abled and taken through to residential care. So some of these areas have moved back in closer to the positions that they were in pre-pandemic. So I'll stop there, Chair, but we're very happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you, Richard and Andy. Any members have any questions on this item? Yes, Mr.
On the slide you've got on the screen there, you say 38% are deteriorating. Is there an action plan in place to resolve those deteriorating KPIs?
Yes, just to say, each year off the back of the full benchmarking exercise that we do put together with departments an action plan, and it goes to the corporate management team. It sort of feeds into the budget process at this time of year, and it also feeds into service plans. So very much we want to use this exercise and this data to help sort of move those issues forward. And you'll see in the report that some areas have moved forward this year, so there has been some positive improvements. I think the report tends to read a little bit more negatively because we're really trying to paint a picture and help you understand maybe issues that are lower level in here. So there are quite a few positives in the data as well, but I hope it does give you some sort of narrative background to some of the issues and the challenges, both in terms of the data itself, the COVID impact, and some of the challenges services have got.
Thank you. Mrs. Page.
Thank you very much for your report. As you well know, all our comments were made, and there were a lot last year at the same time, and I'm very pleased that they all have been implemented, and I think it is a very good report. So no disrespect, I actually haven't got any questions. However, a little plea. This is my Bible, my go-to when I write my newsletters, when I have questions for residents, and I always appreciate this report. So I have mentioned it before, but once it's been to Cabinet, can we have a simple link we can also circulate to our emails? So, you know, it is something we can use. You know, I'd prefer a paper copy, to be quite honest, but a link will do. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Does any other member have anything, Mr. Richardson?
Just a very quick one. I think we all are perfectly happy with the aims on this. It's just the measurements, really. I mean, I look at some of these. It says things like increasing the percentage of household waste sent for reuse, but there's nothing that tells me how much increase we've had in the last year. We have the percentage of population actively involved in doing green things, but it doesn't tell me how many more people are actively involved in doing it. So how do we measure progress against the aim if we've got no metrics in the report?
This is the kind of information.
No, thank you for that. I mean, that would be most welcome. I mean, if I just look at this one here, increase in percentage of household waste sent for reuse, recycling and composting, progressing to, I would have thought the first bullet point would have said, we have increased the percentage of household waste sent for reuse by 5% from X to Y. So if we've got the information, shouldn't that be the first bullet point? Yes, yes. I think you'll have to forgive us. I think we had something like several hundred pages for today's meeting, which we only had a week to read. And therefore, that's why if it's put in an easy place for us to see, or if perhaps if the reports could be more concise with half a dozen bullet points, that would enable us to focus on them. So apologies if I missed it, but thank you for that.
Any other questions, comments? No, well, thank you for a very informative report. Obviously, the chart on pages 183 to 184 really does set out the situation in terms of how unfairly the county is treated by the government in terms of being the lowest funded council and getting, you know, about 100 million odd less than the average authority gets, which obviously impacts upon what services that we can deliver. We just have to hope the government can listen and deliver fair funding at some point. But thank you everybody for comments and contributions on this item, and to Andy and Richard for presenting and answering questions on this, and to everybody for their attendance at this meeting today. The date of the next meeting of the Commission is scheduled to take place on the 30th of January 2023 at 10 a.m. We have no urgent items, therefore I close the meeting and thank everyone for your attendance today. Thank you.